Hey everyone, I'm the storyteller and I'm here to help you relax tonight. I know a lot of you use this video to fall asleep, so before we start, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, tell me in the comments, where are you from and what time is it there? Now get comfortable, take a deep breath and just relax. The Farm Ranch Nightmare. I had to move in with my grandparents on their farm ranch after my parents threw me out. I was broke and couldn't afford rent anywhere else, so they offered me a small bedroom on the first floor for barely any money. The room had this overwhelming smell that old houses sometimes have, and my grandmother had filled it with religious items. There was this massive painting of Jesus that seemed to watch me wherever I moved in the room. Everything seemed normal during my first week there. I was working at a corner store in town, coming home late most nights. But during my second week, something strange happened that changed everything. I got home after dark one evening and was fumbling with my keys at the front door when I heard something unusual. There were footsteps coming from the crop fields. At first, I figured someone was trying to steal vegetables from my grandfather's garden. Thieves sometimes targeted farms like ours looking for easy produce to take. I decided to investigate quietly, being careful not to step on any twigs or dried leaves that might give away my position. As I crept closer to the fields, I could make out a figure in the darkness. But something was wrong. This person wasn't standing up like a normal thief would. They were crawling on their hands and knees through the crops, moving in a strange, unnatural way. My heart started racing. Something about this whole situation felt wrong. Instead of confronting this person myself, I quietly backed away and went inside to wake my grandfather. He was a tough old man who didn't take kindly to trespassers. Grandpa grabbed his rifle and stormed outside, yelling threats at the top of his lungs. "If I catch you on my property again, I'll make sure you regret it," he shouted into the darkness. His voice echoed across the fields. We stood there for a few minutes, but whoever was out there had disappeared into the night. I thought that would be the end of it, but I was wrong. The very next night, I woke up to the sound of laughter outside my window. It wasn't normal laughter. It was high-pitched and unsettling, like someone was trying to sound scary on purpose. I sat up in bed and saw a dark figure pressed against my window looking inside. When they noticed I was awake, they simply walked away, disappearing into the darkness again. This time, my grandfather was furious when I told him. He stormed to his closet, grabbed his rifle again, and headed for the front door with me following close behind. But as soon as he opened the door, something grabbed his leg from below. He fell hard and I saw someone crouched on our porch. Without thinking, I jumped on the attacker, tackling them to the ground. They were already in a crouched position, so it was easy to knock them over. My grandfather managed to get back on his feet and pointed his gun at the intruder while I called the sheriff. But then I heard my grandfather cry out in pain. I dropped the phone and ran to him, fearing the worst. When I got to the porch, he was on the ground holding his nose, blood running between his fingers. Someone else had shown up, a second person who had punched my elderly grandfather in the face before running off into the night. By the time the sheriff arrived, both intruders were long gone. My grandfather decided to install security cameras around the property after that, especially pointing toward the crop fields. We never found out who those people were or what they wanted, but the cameras seemed to keep them away after that. The late-night visitors. Last month, I experienced something that still gives me nightmares. I had been out with my sister and her husband along with some of their friends. We had dinner and hung out until pretty late. When I finally got home, I found a note from my mom stuck to the front door. She wanted me to take the garbage cans out to the street for pickup the next morning. I tried to be quiet since everyone in the house was sleeping. As I wheeled the garbage cans from the side of the house to the curb, I heard voices coming from our backyard. This was strange. It was past midnight and we weren't expecting anyone. I carefully looked over our fence to see what was going on. Two people were standing by our patio table having a conversation. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but they definitely didn't belong there. My stomach dropped as I realized we had intruders in our yard. I ran inside to wake my mom. My dad doesn't live with us anymore, so it was just the two of us in the house. We had barely made it out of her bedroom when we saw the two people from the backyard coming up our stairs. They were inside our house. Without thinking, I pushed my mom toward the window in her room. There was a small ledge outside that we could stand on. I practically forced her to climb out, knowing we had to escape. As I was climbing out after her, the two intruders entered the bedroom. I only caught a quick glimpse of them, two figures dressed in dark clothing, before I jumped down to the ledge and then to the ground below. My mom and I ran to our neighbor's house as fast as we could. They called the police while we waited inside, shaking with fear. The police searched our house but found no one. Nothing was stolen, but knowing that strangers had been in our home, in our personal space, was terrifying. We thought that was the end of it, but 2 weeks later something else happened. At 3 in the morning our phone started ringing. Not just once or twice, it rang continuously over and over again. It never went to voicemail, it just kept ringing. After about 10 rings my mom got up to check who was calling. The caller ID showed a blocked number. We decided not to answer, thinking it might stop. But it didn't. The phone rang non-stop for 10 more minutes. Finally, my mom couldn't take it anymore and unplugged the phone from the wall. The next day, she received a text message on her cell phone from an unknown number. All it said was, "Why didn't you pick up? This happened just a week ago and we're still terrified." We don't know if these incidents are connected, but it seems too coincidental. We've installed new locks and a security system, but we still jump at every strange noise. The girl in the wall. This story was told to me by a police officer who responded to one of the most disturbing calls of his career. A 14-year-old girl was sleeping in her room on a school night when she suddenly woke up, remembering she had homework due the next day that she hadn't even started. She turned on her bedside lamp and checked the clock. It was exactly 1:15 a.m. She grabbed her textbook and started working, trying to finish as quickly as possible so she could get back to sleep. As she worked, she began hearing faint noises. At first, she thought it was just the house settling, something all houses do at night. But as she stopped writing to listen more carefully, the sounds became clearer. It sounded like something was moving inside the walls, not mice or small animals but something much larger. Her bedroom had a storage space built into the wall, with a large square panel that could be removed to access it. The sounds seemed to be coming from there. As the noises grew louder, sounding like someone pushing and scraping against the inside of the wall, the girl started screaming for her parents. The moment she screamed, the noises became frantic, like someone was scrambling or running inside the wall space. Then, horrifyingly, the panel door popped off the wall, and a figure emerged from the darkness within. The girl's parents heard her screams even through multiple closed doors. When her father burst into the room, he found a man tall, overweight and disheveled, with his hand over his daughter's mouth, trying to keep her quiet. The father didn't hesitate. He attacked the intruder, landing several punches to the man's stomach. The intruder was caught off guard and couldn't fight back effectively. Within seconds, the father had subdued him and called the police. When the police searched the intruder, they found something deeply disturbing: 2 pairs of the girl's underwear in his pockets. It became clear that this man had been living in the wall space, possibly for days or even weeks, watching the family and waiting for an opportunity. The investigation revealed that the man had found a way into the storage space from outside the house and had been living there, coming out at night when the family was asleep. He had been stealing food and other items, which explained why things had been going missing from their kitchen. The beach encounter. My wife and I decided to spend an evening at Cedar Beach, enjoying the ocean air and taking a walk along the shore. Unfortunately, we didn't realize the beach closed at 9:30 p.m., and by the time we got there, we only had about an hour before closing time. Since we had driven quite far to get there and the beach was miles from any other entertainment, we decided to make the most of it and take a long walk along the water's edge. The beach was completely deserted. We didn't see another soul during our entire walk. We walked for about half an hour in one direction, then turned around to head back to our car. That's when we noticed something strange. When we looked down at the sand, we saw more than just our footprints. There were 2 other sets of footprints that definitely weren't there when we had walked this way earlier. Our footprints from the first part of our walk were partially washed away by the waves, but these new prints were fresh and clear. What made it even stranger was that the footprints seemed to veer off from the wet sand into the dry sand of the dunes, where they would be harder to track. At first we tried to rationalize it. Maybe another couple had been walking and we just hadn't seen them. But we had walked for over a mile without seeing anyone, and the beach had been closing soon. Who else would be out here? I decided to investigate. Using the flashlight app on my phone, I scanned the nearby dunes, calling out to see if anyone was there. My wife waited on the beach while I walked toward some large garbage bins, the only place where someone could realistically hide. As I got closer to the bins, I noticed a concrete tunnel that probably led to the parking lot. I shined my light into the tunnel entrance and what I saw made my blood run cold. I immediately switched off the light, but the image was burned into my mind. There were 2 figures huddled in that tunnel, but they didn't look entirely human. They were crouched down, naked, with skin that looked diseased or severely damaged, flaky and wrinkled in an unnatural way. In the brief moment I saw them, they didn't move, just stayed huddled together in the darkness. I didn't say a word. I just turned and ran back to my wife, grabbing her hand and pulling her along as we sprinted back to our car. We made it back in about 5 minutes, completely out of breath and terrified. Once we were safely in the car with the doors locked, I finally told her what I had seen. She looked at me like I had lost my mind, and honestly, I couldn't blame her. What I had seen didn't make sense. The next day, I reported the incident to the authorities, trying to describe what I had witnessed. They took my report but seemed skeptical. Since then, I've returned to that beach at night once a week, always staying in my car, watching for any sign of those creatures. I've never seen them again, but I know what I saw that night was real. The night janitor's terror. I worked as a night janitor at the local high school for 3 years. Most nights, I was the only person in the entire building, which suited me fine. The pay was decent and I enjoyed the solitude. I had a routine: start with the downstairs classrooms, work my way upstairs, then finish with the hallways. The cafeteria, gym, and other large spaces were cleaned by the day shift. Since I was always alone, I would bring several radios and place them throughout the hallways, playing music to keep me company. The empty school could feel creepy at night, and the music helped make it feel less isolating. The school building was shaped like a U, with classrooms along both sides and only one way to get from one side to the other on each floor. One night, I was mopping the floor in a social studies classroom on one side of the U when something caught my attention. Across the courtyard, on the other side of the school, I saw lights turn on in one of the classrooms. Not lights that had been left on. I always turned off lights in rooms I wasn't cleaning. These lights had just turned on while I was watching. Then I saw a figure walk up to the window. They stopped and stared directly at me through the window. Even from that distance, I could see enough to make my skin crawl. It was a man who looked to be in his 30s or 40s, with dark hair and a scruffy beard. His face had something wrong with it, something that made me deeply uncomfortable. As I stood frozen watching him, he slowly raised his hand and began waving at me. It wasn't a friendly wave, it was slow, deliberate, and menacing. I pulled the blinds shut in my classroom and tried to catch my breath, my heart pounding. What should I do? Should I confront him? Call the police? Run. After a moment, I raised the blinds again to look. The lights in the other classroom were now off. This was worse. It meant he was on the move, probably heading my way. I made the decision to run. I bolted from the classroom, ran down the stairs, and burst out the back door of the school. I didn't care about my job or my things, I just needed to get out of there. The next day, the school administration reviewed the security footage. What they found was disturbing. The cameras showed the man emerging from the basement of the school in the middle of the night. He had wandered through the hallways for a while before I spotted him. But here's the truly terrifying part. After I ran, the cameras showed him going back down into the basement, but he never came back up. A search of the basement found no trace of him. This suggests there might be hidden rooms or exits down there that nobody knows about. I still work at the school, but now I'm never alone. They've hired a second night janitor to work with me, and we've been instructed never to go into the basement. Sometimes, when it's very quiet, I swear I can hear movement down there. The house cleaner's discovery. When I was 17, I worked as a house cleaner to save money for college. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid well enough. One of my regular clients was a man named Jeffrey who lived in a large house on the outskirts of town. Jeffrey was rarely home when I cleaned, which was fine by me. We had only spoken face-to-face once when he hired me, and a few brief times when he came home early from work. He seemed normal enough, quiet, polite, always paid on time. He had one strict rule: never go into the basement. He even put a sign on the basement door reminding me. I respected his wishes, though I always wondered what was down there. Maybe he had valuable items stored there, or perhaps it was just his private space. After working for Jeffrey for several months, curiosity finally got the better of me. I was dusting the furniture in his bedroom when I decided to snoop a little. I don't know why, maybe it was just teenage curiosity. I started going through his dresser drawers. The large drawers contained nothing interesting, just clothes neatly folded and organized. But the smaller drawers held more personal items: cameras, batteries, photo albums, and various small objects. In the bottom drawer, tucked perfectly into the corner, was a small wooden box with a lock on it. I remembered seeing a small key on Jeffrey's key ring in the kitchen that looked like it might fit. I knew I shouldn't, but I had to know what was in that box. I got the key from the kitchen and tried it in the lock. It fit perfectly. Inside the box was a stack of photographs. At first they seemed innocent enough: black and white photos of the house, various rooms, the garden. But as I flipped through them, I found myself in every single photo. Pictures of me cleaning the living room, vacuuming the hallway, dusting the shelves. Then more disturbing ones: me in the bathroom, me changing my shirt when I thought I was alone. The most terrifying photo was in color, which made it stand out from the rest. It was taken from outside the kitchen window, showing me washing dishes. The angle suggested the photographer had been hiding in the bushes. My hands shaking, I selected a few of the most incriminating photos as evidence and put the rest back in the box. I locked it and returned it to the drawer, trying to leave everything exactly as I found it. I was about to leave the house and never return when I passed the basement door. Since I was never coming back anyway, I decided to see what was in the basement. The curiosity that had been eating at me for months won out over my fear. I opened the door and flicked on the light switch. The smell hit me immediately, a horrible stench like rotting meat. The walls were covered with posters, many of them inappropriate and disturbing. Some showed young people in situations that made my stomach turn. There were 2 doors at the far end of the basement. The smell was strongest near those doors. I didn't open them, I didn't want to know what was behind them. But as I stood there, frozen with fear, I noticed a buzzing sound. Looking up, I saw a camera mounted in the corner, its red light blinking as it recorded me. The camera seemed to stop moving when I noticed it, as if someone was controlling it and had frozen when they realized I'd seen it. That was enough for me. I ran up the stairs out of the house and drove home as fast as I could. Jeffrey tried calling me once after that. I didn't answer and he didn't leave a message. I'm grateful I never gave him my home address. I kept those photos for a while, thinking about going to the police, but eventually I burned them. I just wanted to forget the whole experience. The gas station encounter. I was finishing my midnight shift at Stop and Shop, exhausted and ready to go home. My coworker and I walked out to the parking lot together. It was always safer that way at night. As we approached our cars, a black pickup truck pulled up beside us, blocking our path. Inside were a man and woman who looked rough. The man had a scraggly beard and mustache, wearing a dirty baseball cap with a cigarette hanging from his mouth. The woman's hair was matted and unwashed, and her clothes looked like they hadn't been changed in days. The man rolled down his window and asked if we had any spare change for gas. They claimed to be stranded and needed money to get home. My coworker dug through his pockets and found 2 quarters, which he dropped into the man's outstretched hand. I pulled out my wallet and gave him a dollar bill, hoping they would leave us alone. The man looked at the money in his hand, maybe $1.50 total, then looked back at us with cold eyes. "I'm going to need more than that," he said, his voice flat and threatening. My coworker and I exchanged nervous glances. We both apologized and said that was all the cash we had on us. The man's face darkened. He swore at us, and I noticed the woman in the passenger seat was smiling, not a friendly smile, but something twisted and unpleasant. I decided to take action. I walked around their truck quickly and my coworker did the same. We both rushed to our cars. As I fumbled with my keys, I could hear the truck's engine revving as the man turned it around. I started my car and immediately put it in drive, speeding out of the parking lot. In my rearview mirror, I could see the truck following me. My heart was pounding as I tried to lose them, taking random turns and speeding through yellow lights. Eventually I thought I had lost them. I pulled into a gas station to catch my breath and check on my coworker. I texted him and he replied that he was okay and had made it home safely. But then I saw headlights pulling into the gas station. It was the black pickup truck. They had found me somehow. The truck pulled up in front of my car, trying to block me in. I saw the woman reaching for something. It was a gun. I threw my car in reverse just as she was lowering her window. I heard a sharp crack and felt the impact as a bullet hit my back window, creating a spider web of cracks in the glass. I managed to get out of the parking lot, driving erratically to lose them. This time I took a longer route home, constantly checking my mirrors. I finally lost them and made it home safely. The next morning I found 2 more bullet holes in my car, one in the trunk and one in the rear quarter panel. I reported the incident to the police, but without a license plate number or better description, there wasn't much they could do. I think about how close I came to dying that night, and for what? $1.50? It's terrifying to think there are people out there willing to kill for so little. The asylum exploration. When my half-sister's cousin Andrew and I were 18, we decided to explore the abandoned asylum in our town. It had been closed for decades and local legends said it was haunted. We didn't believe in ghosts, but we thought it would make a cool video for YouTube, which was still relatively new at the time. We went after midnight when we were sure no one would be around. The asylum was surrounded by a chain-link fence, but someone had already cut a hole in it. We crawled through and made our way to the building. We got in through a broken window on the ground floor. There were wooden planks on the floor that had once been nailed over the window to keep people out. We turned on our flashlights and Andrew started recording with his camera, which had night vision capability. The inside was exactly what you'd expect from an abandoned building: broken glass everywhere, graffiti on the walls, debris scattered across the floors. There were holes in the wooden floors in some places, revealing darkness below. We carefully avoided these, not wanting to fall through. We explored room after room, finding old medical equipment, rusted bed frames and peeling paint. One room had a dental chair in it, which was particularly unsettling. The leather was cracked and stained and the metal was rusted. Various dental tools were scattered on the floor around it. The bathroom was the worst room on that floor. As soon as we entered, we heard a constant dripping sound coming from one of the stalls. When we tried to open the stall door, we found it was locked from the inside. The gap at the bottom was too small to see under or crawl through. We left that room quickly, both of us thoroughly creeped out by the sound. Eventually, we found a stairwell that went both up and down. We decided to go down to the basement level. We wanted our video to be as scary as possible, and everyone knows the basement is always the scariest part. The basement hallways were darker and more oppressive than upstairs. Our flashlight beams seemed smaller down here, swallowed up by the darkness. We found an old bulletin board with photographs and news clippings still pinned to it, yellowed with age. As we were examining the board, trying to read the old articles, we heard a metallic thud from down the hallway. We both froze, shining our lights in that direction. For just a moment, we saw what looked like a forehead, pale skin pulling back from the hallway into one of the rooms. Andrew started screaming and we both ran. We didn't care about the video anymore, we just wanted to get out. As we pounded up the stairs, we could hear footsteps following us, staying just one flight below. The feeling of being chased in that dark, abandoned building was pure terror. Every second, I expected to feel a hand grab my shoulder and pull me back down the stairs. But we made it to the main floor and ran to the window we'd entered through. As we climbed out, we could hear the stairwell door opening behind us. We didn't look back, we just ran to Andrew's car and drove away as fast as possible. We never went back and we never posted the video online. Some experiences are better left unshared. The hidden room. My wife and I had just moved into our first house together. It was an older home with character hardwood floors, crown molding, and a layout that included a first-floor bedroom, a main floor, and a den. There was no basement, which we liked because basements had always creeped us out. Everything seemed perfect for the first few days. But then we started hearing strange noises at night. They seemed to come from below our bedroom, which didn't make sense since there was no basement. At first, we assumed it was just the house settling or maybe animals under the floorboards. But the noises continued and got stranger. It sounded like furniture being moved, sometimes accompanied by what sounded like moaning or mumbling. We checked under the bed thinking maybe something was stuck there but found nothing. We also noticed that doors we had closed before bed would be open in the morning. My wife's closet door was always open, no matter how many times we closed it. We tried everything, making sure the door was properly latched, checking if the house was level, even putting a chair in front of it. Nothing worked. One night, we decided to stay awake and figure out what was happening. We lay in bed, lights off, just listening. The noises from below were louder than ever, definite sounds of movement, things being pushed around, and what sounded like someone talking to themselves. I went down to the den and pressed my ear against the wall, trying to pinpoint where the sounds were coming from. They seemed to be inside the wall itself, but lower, below the level of the den floor. It didn't make any sense. We stayed awake until about 2 a.m., taking turns listening and watching. My wife started to doze off and I must have followed shortly after. I woke to her shaking me, tears streaming down her face. She pointed at her closet. The closet door was open as usual, but this time we could see that a section of the closet floor had been lifted up. There was a hidden trapdoor that we had never noticed before, probably because it had been covered by our boxes and shoes. The trapdoor was propped open, revealing a ladder going down into darkness. I told my wife to lock the bedroom door and call 911 while I investigated. I grabbed a machete we kept for yard work and slowly approached the opening. I could hear someone down there moving around. I started down the ladder, the machete awkward in my hand. When I reached the bottom, I found a light switch. The room that was revealed when the lights came on was disturbing. A small living space with a cot, a table and chair, and children's toys scattered across the floor. Someone had been living under our house. A scream from upstairs sent me scrambling back up the ladder. Someone was trying to break down our bedroom door. By the time I got up there, they had already kicked a hole in it. A man's face appeared in the hole, dirty, with wild eyes and unkempt hair. He must have seen the machete in my hand because he immediately turned and ran. I heard the front door slam as he escaped. The police arrived soon after but never found the man. We learned that the hidden room was probably an old Prohibition-era hiding spot or maybe a cold cellar that had been forgotten when the house was renovated. But we never learned who the man was, how long he'd been living there, or how he'd been getting in and out without us knowing. We moved out the next week. Some things aren't worth trying to understand. The Nightmare Neighbors. When I was 27, I moved in with my girlfriend into a small apartment. It wasn't fancy, we couldn't afford much, but it was ours and we were happy. That happiness lasted exactly one night. Our neighbors in the next apartment were incredibly loud. Not just normal loud, there was screaming, banging, and thumping that went on all night long. It sounded like they were moving furniture or maybe fighting. The noise didn't stop until dawn. My girlfriend wanted me to confront them right away, but I suggested we wait and see if it was just a one-time thing. Maybe they were having a party or an argument that got out of hand. The next day was quiet. We didn't hear anything from them while we unpacked our boxes and arranged our furniture. I started to think maybe the previous night had been an anomaly. But when darkness fell, the noise started again. Screaming, banging on the walls, furniture being dragged across the floor. Sometimes they would bang directly on the wall we shared, as if they were trying to get our attention or annoy us on purpose. I'd had enough. I went next door and knocked firmly. The door opened to reveal a middle-aged woman with stark white skin and hair, an albino. Her voice, when she spoke, was rough and raspy, like she'd been smoking for decades. I politely asked her to keep the noise down, explaining that we were trying to sleep. She looked at me with pale eyes and told me to mind my own business before slamming the door in my face. The noise got even louder after that, as if she was punishing us for complaining. My girlfriend suggested we report them to the building management. The next morning, I went to the front desk and complained about the couple in the apartment next door. The doorman looked confused. He checked his records and told me that only one person lived in that apartment, a woman named Kathy. Her husband had died 5 years ago. This was strange. The amount of noise suggested at least 2 people, maybe more. The doorman offered to check it out. He knocked on Kathy's door and she let him search the apartment. He came back shaking his head. She was definitely alone in there. He did ask her to keep the noise down and I thanked him. That night, miraculously, it was quiet. We actually got a full night's sleep. But I woke up in the middle of the night with the feeling that something was wrong. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I realized there was someone standing at the foot of our bed. A figure in the darkness just standing there watching us sleep. "Anna?" I whispered, thinking maybe my girlfriend had gotten up. But I felt her stir next to me. She was still in bed. The figure at the foot of the bed spoke in that familiar raspy voice. "You shouldn't have reported me." I screamed and fumbled for the light switch. My girlfriend woke up and started screaming too. By the time I got the lights on, the figure was gone. We were alone in the room, but our bedroom door was open. I put on my shoes and ran out into the hallway looking for any sign of Kathy. Her apartment door was open, but when I looked inside, it was empty. How had she disappeared so quickly? Where could she have gone? The building management called the police, but they couldn't find any sign of forced entry into our apartment. They suggested we might have forgotten to lock our door, which we knew wasn't true. For a whole week we heard nothing from Kathy. Her apartment remained quiet. Then one night there were 4 loud, deliberate knocks on our shared wall. Not the random banging from before, these were purposeful, meant to get our attention. We moved out the very next day. As we were loading our things into the moving truck, I saw the doorman. He told me that Kathy had been found that morning, that she had passed away in her apartment several days ago. The coroner estimated she had been dead for at least a week. But that couldn't be right. Who had knocked on our wall the night before? I still have nightmares about that raspy voice and those pale eyes. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I wake up expecting to see her standing at the foot of my bed. Some encounters stay with you forever, becoming part of your fears, part of who you are. These stories remind us that the real world can be just as terrifying as any horror movie. They show us that danger can come from anywhere, from strangers in the night, from hidden spaces in our own homes, from people we trust, or from neighbors we barely know. What makes these stories truly frightening is that they could happen to anyone. We all have to walk to our cars at night, we all have neighbors, we all trust people to come into our homes. These everyday situations can turn dangerous in an instant. The people who experienced these events were forever changed by them. They learned to be more cautious, to trust their instincts, to pay attention to warning signs. They learned that sometimes when something feels wrong, it probably is. So the next time you hear a strange noise at night or notice someone watching you a little too closely, or feel like something isn't quite right, trust that feeling. It might just save your life. Because in the end, the most terrifying monsters aren't the ones from our imagination. They're the ones that knock on our doors, hide in our walls, and walk among us every day wearing human faces and pretending to be just like everyone else. Stay safe out there and always remember, sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that really happened. Samantha's Night Shift Nightmare. My name is Samantha, and when I was 20 years old, I worked at a Walmart in a small town called Jackson in Alabama. Since I wasn't going to school full-time, my boss would often schedule me for overnight shifts back when the store was still open 24 hours a day. The store was a supercenter, which meant it was massive. Even during the overnight hours, there would still be several employees working throughout the building. My usual shift ran from 10 at night until 7 in the morning. I was one of only a handful of employees doing stock work during these hours, with maybe 1 or 2 cashiers working the registers up front. Our store sat in the countryside of Alabama, surrounded by farmland and small communities. We didn't get many customers during the late night hours, which made it the perfect time for restocking shelves and organizing merchandise. The store would be mostly empty, with long stretches where you wouldn't see another soul. I didn't know the other employees working that particular night very well. The store was so large that we rarely ran into each other during our shifts. Everyone had their own sections to work in, and we mostly kept to ourselves. I started my shift that night in the men's department, folding pants and tidying up the displays. I always wore headphones while I worked because there were no managers around at night to tell me to take them out. The music helped pass the time and made the empty store feel less creepy. Around 11:30, a customer came to the jeans section where I was working. This wasn't unusual, people would still come in to shop until around midnight. The man approached me and asked if we had a specific pair of pants in a different waist size. I checked the rack and apologized, telling him that whatever was on display was all we had in stock. He thanked me politely and turned to put the jeans back on the rack. As he did, we made accidental eye contact. It was one of those awkward moments where you catch someone looking at you and don't know whether to smile or look away. The moment passed and he walked away. I went back to folding clothes and didn't think much about the interaction. It seemed like a normal customer encounter at the time. As the night went on, the store became quieter and quieter. By 1 in the morning it looked like a ghost town. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and my footsteps echoed in the empty aisles. I couldn't see or hear any other customers anywhere in the massive building. I had moved from the clothing department to the appliances section. This job required more physical work, bringing boxes from the back storage area and stocking heavy items like coffee makers and blenders on the shelves. I loaded up a wagon with boxes and wheeled it to one of the aisles. The shelves in this section were mostly empty, which meant I could see through to the next aisle over. As I was unpacking boxes, I noticed someone standing in that aisle watching me through the gap in the shelves. When they realized I had spotted them, they quickly looked away and pretended to be examining products. Something about their profile looked familiar. I stepped closer to get a better look through the shelves and my stomach dropped. It was the same customer from the men's department, the one who had asked about the jeans 2 hours earlier. What was he still doing in the store? How could anyone shop for 2 hours without buying anything? I decided to test my suspicion. I grabbed my wagon and walked past the end of his aisle, glancing down it as I passed. The man had no shopping cart, no basket, nothing in his hands. He was just standing there empty-handed in the middle of the night. A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't normal behavior. I quickly finished stocking the coffee makers and other appliances, trying not to show that I was nervous. As soon as the wagon was empty, I headed to the back storage area, practically speed walking to get away from the sales floor. Once I was in the employee area, I took a break in the lounge. I sat there for a while, playing on my phone and trying to calm my nerves. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe the guy was just a weird late-night shopper. But something in my gut told me this wasn't right. After about 20 minutes, I decided I needed to get back to work. I couldn't hide in the break room all night. To avoid that section of the store, I decided to work on grocery items instead. The grocery section was on the opposite side of the building from appliances. I went into the dairy cooler to prepare products for restocking. The cooler was a large refrigerated room where we stored milk, yogurt, cheese, and other dairy products. It was loud inside because of the massive refrigeration units that kept everything cold. The constant humming and whirring of the machines made it hard to hear anything else. I was checking expiration dates on yogurt containers and loading them into crates when I heard the heavy door to the cooler burst open. The sound was loud enough to hear over the refrigerators, which meant someone had pushed it open forcefully. There was a stack of boxes on a pallet that happened to have a gap between them. Through this gap, I could see the door to the cooler. My blood turned to ice when I saw who had entered. It was the same customer again. But customers weren't allowed in the dairy cooler. This was an employees-only area, clearly marked with signs. There was no innocent reason for him to be back here. My mind raced as I tried to figure out what to do. I made a split-second decision to hide. I crouched down behind one of the metal shelving units and pulled a large box of eggs in front of me for extra cover. The noise from the refrigeration units was so loud that I didn't have to worry about him hearing me move. I sat there behind that box, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I kept my head down, afraid to look up and see where he was. Time seemed to slow down as I waited, hoping to hear the door open and close, signaling that he had left. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours. The refrigerators continued their constant humming. My legs started to cramp from crouching, but I didn't dare move. Finally, after what seemed like forever, I couldn't stand not knowing anymore. I slowly lifted my head to peek over the box. He was standing right there, looking down at me with a disturbing smile on his face. I screamed as loud as I could. The smile vanished from his face, replaced by panic. He reached down, trying to put his hand over my mouth to stop my screaming, but I wasn't going to let that happen. I shoved the box of eggs forward with all my strength, hitting him in the legs. Eggs fell everywhere, breaking on the floor and making him step back to avoid the mess. That gave me the opening I needed. I jumped up and ran past him toward the door. He didn't try to grab me, maybe he was too surprised or worried about slipping on the broken eggs. I burst through the cooler door and ran through the back area until I found another stock employee. The employee's name was Bob, according to his name tag. I was breathing hard, trying to explain what had happened, when the man from the dairy cooler suddenly appeared. He had followed me out, but now his demeanor was completely different. He smiled apologetically and started explaining that he was from corporate headquarters. He claimed he was there to make sure employees were working efficiently during the night shift. He said he hadn't meant to scare me in the dairy cooler. He was just checking to make sure I wasn't slacking off. Bob seemed to buy this explanation completely. He nodded along as the man talked, not questioning why someone from corporate would be sneaking around the store at 2 a.m. But I knew something was wrong. Everything about this felt like a lie. I challenged him, asking why he had tried to put his hand over my mouth. He claimed he was trying to avoid causing a scene that might disturb other workers. Then, incredibly, he had the nerve to tell me to go finish the appliance section I had been working on earlier. He said it with authority as if he really was my boss. As he started to walk away, I called out, "What's your name?" Without turning around, he called back, "Tom," and then he disappeared around a corner, walking quickly like he wanted to get away from us. The next day, I called one of the managers as soon as I woke up. I explained everything that had happened and asked if there had been a scheduled visit from corporate. I described the man who called himself Tom and asked if he sounded familiar. My manager, Margaret, listened to my story with growing concern. When I finished, she said it sounded like complete nonsense. There was no one from corporate named Tom, and there was no scheduled visit. More importantly, she said, no one from corporate would ever be in the store at 2 a.m, and they certainly wouldn't be sneaking around scaring employees. Margaret immediately pulled up the security camera footage from the night before. What they found made my skin crawl. The cameras showed this man had been in the store for hours, following me from department to department. He would hide behind displays and shelves, always keeping me in sight. When I moved to a new section, he would follow at a distance. The footage showed him entering the employees-only areas multiple times throughout the night. It was clear he had been stalking me specifically. The cameras never showed him following or watching the other employees. A police report was filed immediately. The man's image was captured clearly on several cameras, but he had paid cash for a small item early in the evening, so there was no credit card to trace. He had never been seen in the store before that night, and he hasn't been seen since. After that experience, I told Margaret I couldn't work night shifts anymore. The thought of being in that empty store at night, wondering if someone was watching me, was too much to handle. She understood completely and changed my schedule to day shifts only. I still work at that Walmart, but now I'm either a daytime stock person or a cashier. I never work alone and I never work at night. Sometimes, when I'm stocking shelves during the day and the store is busy with customers, I still find myself looking over my shoulder, checking to make sure no one is watching me. The Black Friday stalker. Everyone knows Walmart can attract some unusual customers, but what happened to me on a Thursday night before Black Friday went beyond unusual. It was terrifying. I had gone to Walmart around 11 at night, hoping to beat the Black Friday crowds and score some early deals. The store was staying open extra late in preparation for the shopping frenzy that would begin at midnight. I was specifically looking for a laptop that was advertised at a great price. I found the electronics section and spotted the laptop I wanted on the shelf. As I reached for it, I realized it was the last one. Just as I picked up the box, a large, disheveled man approached me. He was dirty, with stained clothes and an unpleasant odor that I could smell from several feet away. He insisted that he needed that laptop badly. His voice was aggressive from the start, not asking politely but demanding that I give it to him. I nervously apologized and said it was the last one, that I had gotten to it first. That's when he started making a scene. He began yelling at me, calling me names and saying I had stolen it from him. Other customers started staring at the commotion. The man was clearly not mentally stable, and his behavior was becoming increasingly erratic. My heart was racing. I'm not someone who deals with confrontation well, and this man was much larger than me. I clutched the laptop box and quickly walked away, heading straight for the checkout lines. He continued yelling at me as I walked, following me for a bit before finally stopping. Some other customers in line tried to make me feel better, making jokes about the crazy people you see at Walmart. One elderly woman patted my arm and said, "Don't worry, honey, he's just a nut." I tried to laugh it off, but I was still shaken by the encounter. I paid for the laptop and drove home, grateful to be away from that situation. When I got home, I found that my family was already asleep. It was a warm night, so I decided to sit outside by our pool and set up my new laptop in the fresh air. I had been outside for maybe 10 minutes when the motion sensor light on the side of our house suddenly turned on. This light was triggered by movement, and while it sometimes went off when animals from the nearby woods crossed our yard, it still made me nervous. I walked over to check the side of the house, but I didn't see anything. No animals, no people, nothing that should have triggered the light. Still feeling uneasy from the encounter at Walmart, I decided to go inside and finish setting up the laptop in the living room. I had just gotten comfortable on the couch when a car alarm started blaring outside. I recognized the sound immediately. It was my Cadillac. I looked out the window to confirm, and sure enough, my car's lights were flashing and the horn was honking repeatedly. I ran upstairs to get my keys and tried pressing the panic button to turn off the alarm. It didn't work from inside the house, so I had to step out onto the front porch. As I clicked the button and the alarm finally stopped, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There was a car parked in front of our house that hadn't been there when I got home. This was extremely unusual. We lived in a gated community where everyone had large driveways. There was no reason for anyone to park on the street unless they didn't belong there. I stepped down from the porch to get a better look at the car. That's when I saw that someone was sitting in the driver's seat. They were just sitting there in the dark watching our house. I quickly went back inside and locked the door. I ran to my parents' room and woke up my mom. My dad wasn't home that night due to their complicated relationship situation, which made me feel even more vulnerable. I told my mom that I thought someone outside meant us harm, that there was a strange car with someone sitting in it. My mom came downstairs with me, clearly worried. She looked through the peephole in our front door, then gasped and put her hands over her mouth. I looked through the peephole too and felt sick when I saw what had scared her. The huge, dirty man from Walmart was standing on our front porch, right on the other side of our door. I whispered to my mom that I thought he had followed me home from the store. As if he had heard me, the doorknob suddenly started turning. He was trying to open our door. When he found it locked, he started pounding on it with his fists, making the whole door shake. My mom let out a cry of fear, which woke up my younger sister. She came out of her room, and when she saw us huddled by the door with someone pounding on it, she started to panic too. The three of us stood there, terrified, as this man tried to break into our house. Then the pounding stopped. There was silence for a few minutes while my mom called 911. She was on the phone with the dispatcher, explaining our situation, when we heard a loud crash from downstairs in the den. The sound of breaking glass echoed through the house. The man had smashed one of our windows. My mom and sister both screamed. I told them to run upstairs and lock themselves in a room while I ran to the den and locked the door from the hallway side, hoping to slow him down. I stood there in the hallway, my heart pounding, expecting to hear him trying to break through the den door. But instead, I heard something that filled me with relief, a police siren outside our house. The police had arrived incredibly quickly, probably because my mom had made it clear we were in immediate danger. I ran outside to meet the officers and led them to the den where the window was broken. They found the man hiding behind one of our couches. He had cut himself climbing through the broken window, and there was blood on his hands and clothes. The police arrested him immediately. As they put him in handcuffs and led him away, he screamed profanities and threats at me, saying he would find me again, that I had stolen from him. His eyes were wild and unfocused, and the officers told us he appeared to be on some kind of drugs. The police took our statements and photographs of the damage. They assured us the man would be charged with breaking and entering, stalking, and making threats. One of the officers told us to try to get some rest, that the man wouldn't be bothering us again anytime soon. But how do you sleep after something like that? How do you feel safe in your own home when someone has followed you there and tried to break in? We had the window repaired the next day and installed a new security system, but I still have nightmares about that night. All of this started because I picked up the last laptop on a shelf. It's terrifying to think that such a simple action could lead to someone following you home and trying to break into your house. It's a reminder that while Walmart might be known for attracting unusual customers, some of them can be genuinely dangerous. The night shift mystery. Working the night shift at Walmart was my second job while I was finishing college. I needed the extra money to pay off student loans, so I worked weekends stocking shelves and doing warehouse work. It wasn't glamorous, but the pay was decent and the work was straightforward. My typical shift ran from 11 at night to 7 in the morning, or sometimes midnight to 7. During these hours, the store was closed to customers, so it was just us employees working to get everything ready for the next day. We would receive deliveries, unload trucks, and restock the shelves. On July 9, 2015, a Thursday night I'll never forget, I was working my usual shift. There were only 3 of us in the entire building that night. Myself, Alvin, and Baco. We had all clocked in together and were wearing the same employee shirts, so I knew exactly who was working with me. I was about halfway through my shift, working in the electronics department, when I saw someone walk past the aisle in my peripheral vision. This immediately struck me as odd because I knew where both Alvin and Baco were supposed to be working, and neither of them should have been in this part of the store. What really caught my attention was that the person was dressed in all black. Not the blue Walmart employee shirt we were all required to wear, but completely black clothing from head to toe. I walked to the end of the aisle and looked around the corner, but no one was there. I called out Alvin and Baco's names, thinking maybe one of them had changed clothes for some reason. When I got no answer, I felt increasingly uneasy. Still, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I had imagined it, or maybe one of my coworkers was playing a prank. I went back to work, trying to focus on the task at hand. I had been holding in the need to use the bathroom for a while, telling myself I'd go when I finished this section. Suddenly, there was a tremendous crash a few aisles away. The sound echoed through the empty store and made me jump. I ran over to investigate and found that a bicycle had somehow fallen off its wall hook. The hook itself was still firmly in place and undamaged, which meant someone would have had to deliberately pull the bike down. I hung the bicycle back up, but now I was on high alert. Someone was definitely in the store who shouldn't be there. I started walking through the aisles, looking for any sign of an intruder. The store felt different now. The emptiness that usually felt peaceful now felt threatening. I reached the back of the store where the paper goods and cleaning supplies were kept. As I stood there listening, I heard something that made my skin crawl, a laugh. It wasn't a normal laugh, but something forced and unnatural, like someone trying to sound scary in a haunted house. The laugh seemed to come from the next aisle over, so I ran around the corner to confront whoever was there. What I saw made my heart skip a beat. A man dressed entirely in black was standing at the far end of the aisle with his back to me. But his head was turned at an unnatural angle so he could look at me with one eye. As soon as I saw him, he took off running. But he didn't run toward me or away from me in a straight line. Instead, I could hear his footsteps running through different aisles, circling around. The creepy laughter continued, echoing through the empty store. It felt like he was playing some kind of sick game, running circles around me. I had to make a choice, try to confront this person alone or find my coworkers for backup. I chose to find help. I ran through the store, following the sound of Alvin's radio, until I found him in the women's clothing department. I quickly explained that someone was in the building who shouldn't be there, someone dressed in all black who was acting strangely. I asked him to tell Baco if he saw him since we didn't have walkie-talkies to communicate. By this point, I really couldn't hold it any longer. I had to use the bathroom. I told Alvin I'd be right back and ran to the employee restroom in the warehouse section. Looking back, this was probably not the smartest decision, but when nature calls, sometimes you don't think clearly. The employee bathroom had multiple stalls. I went into one, put some toilet paper on the seat and sat down. Yes, I'm one of those people who sits even when I just need to pee. It's more comfortable and I was exhausted from working. I had just gotten settled when I heard the bathroom door open and close. My heart started racing again. I called out, "Who is that?" but got no answer. Then I heard that horrible laugh again, echoing off the bathroom walls. Through the gap between the stall door and the frame, I saw someone step into view. They positioned themselves so they could look through the crack at me. All I could see was one eye staring at me through the gap. Then they pressed their face closer until their eye was all I could see. The whispering started next. I couldn't make out any actual words, just a constant stream of whispered sounds that echoed in the empty bathroom. It was one of the most unsettling things I've ever experienced. Thankfully, I had Alvin's phone number saved in my phone. I called him immediately, not bothering to be quiet. I told him loudly to get to the bathroom right away, that the intruder was here with me. I stayed on the line with him and I watched as the eye disappeared from the crack. I heard footsteps running out of the bathroom. About 30 seconds later, Alvin burst through the bathroom door. He said he hadn't seen anyone on his way there. whoever it was had vanished again. We didn't have security guards working the overnight shift, so we couldn't even check the cameras until the next day. I stayed with Alvin for the rest of the shift, helping him with whatever sections he was working in. There was safety in numbers, and I wasn't about to be caught alone again. We didn't see or hear anything else unusual for the rest of the night. When I got home that morning, I sent a text to my boss explaining what had happened. I woke up in the afternoon to his response, and what he told me made the whole experience even more disturbing. He said that all the security camera footage from that night showed nothing but static. Every single camera in the store had somehow been disrupted, recording nothing but interference. The cameras were working fine the night before and the night after, but for that one shift they captured nothing. My boss believed my story, especially given the strange camera malfunction. He thought the two things had to be connected. Someone had deliberately disabled our security system. But without any video evidence, there wasn't much that could be done. No one could explain how someone had gotten into the locked store or why they had targeted me specifically. That was the only night shift I ever worked where something truly unexplainable happened. I continued working there for a few more months until I graduated college, but I was always extra cautious during night shifts. I made sure to stay near my coworkers and never went anywhere in the store alone. To this day, I don't know who that person was or what they wanted. Were they trying to rob the store? Were they mentally ill? Were they specifically targeting me for some reason? The fact that they knew enough to disable the security cameras suggests this wasn't just a random crazy person but someone with a plan. Reflections on retail horror. These stories from Walmart employees show that working retail can sometimes be more dangerous than people realize. When you're dealing with the public, especially during odd hours, you never know what kind of person might walk through those doors. What makes these encounters particularly frightening is how they started as seemingly normal interactions. A customer asking about pants sizes. Someone shopping for Black Friday deals. A regular night shift with familiar coworkers. In each case, something ordinary transformed into something terrifying. The overnight shifts seem particularly vulnerable. With fewer employees and no customers around, workers are isolated and exposed. The massive size of these stores means you could be completely alone in your section, far from help if something goes wrong. The emptiness that makes it efficient for stocking shelves also makes it dangerous if someone with bad intentions gets inside. These experiences have lasting effects on the people who live through them. Samantha can't work night shifts anymore without feeling anxious. The person who was followed home installed a security system and still has nightmares. The night shift worker who encountered the laughing intruder will never know who was stalking them or why the security cameras mysteriously failed that night. It's also disturbing how easily people with bad intentions can blend in with regular customers. The man who stalked Samantha spent hours in the store pretending to shop. He knew enough about retail operations to claim he was from corporate when caught. If Bob hadn't been so gullible, he might have been more convincing. The Black Friday stalker took things to an extreme level, following someone home over a laptop computer. The fact that he found out where his victim lived and attempted to break in shows a level of determination and aggression that goes beyond normal customer disputes. Drugs might have been involved, but that doesn't make the experience any less traumatic for the family he terrorized. Perhaps most unsettling is the mystery of the night shift intruder. Someone went to great lengths to disable security cameras and enter a closed store. They played psychological games with the employee, circling them, laughing in that unnatural way, and creating fear without ever making their intentions clear. The fact that they knew exactly when to run, how to avoid being seen by other employees, and how to disappear without a trace suggests careful planning. These stories serve as important reminders for anyone working retail, especially during vulnerable hours. Always trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Don't ignore that uncomfortable feeling when a customer's behavior seems off. It's better to be overly cautious than to put yourself in danger. Stay aware of your surroundings. Know where your coworkers are and have a way to contact them quickly. If you're working alone in a section, make sure someone knows where you are. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Whether it's calling a coworker, a manager, or even the police, don't try to handle threatening situations on your own. Your safety is more important than any job. Report suspicious behavior immediately. Don't wait until the end of your shift or the next day. If someone is acting strangely, following you, or making you uncomfortable, tell someone right away. Know your store's security procedures. Where are the emergency exits? How do you contact security? Are there panic buttons? Being prepared can make all the difference in an emergency. These Walmart workers survive their encounters, but they carry the psychological scars. They've learned that danger can come from anywhere, that a normal work shift can turn into a nightmare in an instant. Their stories remind us that the people who stock our shelves, ring up our purchases, and keep our stores running deserve respect and protection. The next time you're in a Walmart late at night, or any store for that matter, remember these stories. Be aware of your surroundings. Notice if someone seems to be following you or acting strangely. And spare a thought for the employees working those late shifts, dealing with whatever walks through the doors. Because while Walmart might be known for low prices and convenient shopping, for some employees, it's been the setting for experiences they'll never forget, and not in a good way. These stories prove that sometimes the most ordinary places can become the backdrop for our most terrifying experiences. Stay safe out there whether you're shopping or working. And remember, if something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. Trust your instincts, they might just save your life. The Morning Jogger's Nightmare. My name is Marcus and I've been running for over 10 years. I'm 32 now, and running has always been my way of dealing with stress from work. I live in a mid-sized city with plenty of parks and running trails, but I prefer to run early in the morning when the streets are empty and peaceful. I usually start my runs at 5 in the morning, before the sun comes up. The darkness never bothered me. I wore reflective gear and a headlamp, and I knew my routes by heart. My favorite path took me through the business district, past the city park, and along the river trail before looping back home. It was about 6 miles total and I could finish it in under an hour. One Tuesday morning in October, I started my run as usual. The air was crisp and cool, perfect running weather. The streets were deserted except for the occasional delivery truck or early commuter. I was feeling good, maintaining a steady pace as I made my way through downtown. As I approached the entrance to the river trail, I noticed something unusual. There was a van parked at the trailhead, which wasn't completely out of the ordinary. Sometimes fishermen would park there early to get to the good spots. But something about this van made me uneasy. It was an older model, dirty white with no windows in the back, and it was running with the lights off. I decided to continue my run but stayed alert. The trail was well maintained but surrounded by trees on both sides, creating a tunnel effect in the darkness. My headlamp illuminated the path ahead, but everything beyond its beam was pitch black. About a quarter mile down the trail, I heard footsteps behind me. This wasn't unusual, other runners used this trail too. But these footsteps sounded different. They were heavy and uneven, not the rhythmic pace of a jogger. And they were getting closer. I glanced back and saw a figure about 50 feet behind me. They weren't dressed like a runner, they wore dark clothes and what looked like work boots. Most disturbing was that they had no light, no reflective gear, nothing that a legitimate early morning runner would wear for safety. I picked up my pace slightly, testing whether they were actually following me or just happened to be walking the same direction. The footsteps behind me sped up too. My heart rate increased, and not from the exercise. Something was definitely wrong. The trail curved ahead and I knew there was a side path coming up that led back to the main road. I decided to take it and see if this person would follow. As soon as I turned onto the side path, I heard the footsteps behind me speed up to a run. That's when panic set in. I was being chased. I ran faster than I had in years, my legs pumping furiously as I raced toward the road. Behind me, I could hear heavy breathing and boots pounding on the pavement. The person was gaining on me. I burst out of the trail onto the main road just as a police car was driving by. I frantically waved my arms and the officer stopped. As soon as the patrol car's lights came on, I heard the footsteps behind me stop, then retreat back into the darkness of the trail. The officer listened to my story and called for backup. They searched the trail and found that someone had been living in a makeshift camp about half a mile from where I'd been chased. There were photos of runners taped to trees, including several that looked like they'd been taken of me on previous morning runs. The police increased patrols in the area, but they never caught the person. I stopped running that trail and changed all my routes. Now I only run in well-populated areas, even if it means dealing with traffic and stoplights. The peaceful solitude I once enjoyed while running is gone, replaced by constant vigilance and the memory of those heavy footsteps chasing me through the darkness. The Suburban Stalker. I'm Emma, and this happened when I was in college. I was home for summer break, staying with my parents in their suburban neighborhood. I'd been running competitively since high school and needed to maintain my fitness over the summer, so I mapped out several routes through the quiet residential streets around my parents' house. The neighborhood was one of those typical suburban developments, cookie-cutter houses with neat lawns, sidewalks throughout, and very little traffic during the day. It seemed like the perfect place to run safely. Most of my routes were between 3 and 5 miles, weaving through the various streets and cul-de-sacs. I usually ran in the late afternoon around 4 or 5 o'clock, when it wasn't too hot but there was still plenty of daylight. The neighborhood was quiet at that time, most people were still at work, Kids were inside playing video games or at summer activities, and I rarely saw anyone except the occasional dog walker or gardener. About 2 weeks into my summer training, I started noticing a pattern. There was a dark blue sedan that I kept seeing during my runs. At first, I thought it was just coincidence, lots of people have dark blue cars. But then I realized it was the same car each time, with tinted windows and a small dent in the rear bumper. The car would appear at different points during my run. Sometimes it would be parked on a street I was running down. Other times it would drive slowly past me. Once, I saw it parked at the end of a cul-de-sac, and when I turned around to run back the way I came, it started up and followed me at a distance. I mentioned it to my mom, but she said I was probably being paranoid. Lots of people have blue cars, she said. And maybe they just happened to be going the same direction as you. But I knew something wasn't right. The timing was too consistent, the behavior too strange. I started varying my routes and times, but the car still appeared. It was like whoever was driving knew exactly where I would be. I began to feel like I was being hunted, studied. Every run became an exercise in anxiety rather than stress relief. One day I decided to test my suspicions. Instead of my usual route, I ran to a small park in the neighborhood that had a circular path. I figured if the car showed up there, it would prove I was being followed. Sure enough, about 10 minutes into my run around the park path, the blue sedan pulled into the parking lot. This time the driver got out. He was a middle-aged man, ordinary-looking, wearing khakis and a polo shirt like he'd just gotten off work. He started walking on the path in the opposite direction from me so we would pass each other. As we approached, he smiled and said, "Nice day for a run." Something about his smile made my skin crawl. It didn't reach his eyes, which were focused on me with an intensity that felt predatory. I mumbled something and kept running, but now I was truly scared. When I glanced back, he had turned around and was following me on the path. I left the park immediately, running faster than I had been, and took a complicated route home, cutting through yards and doubling back several times. When I got home, I was shaking. I told my parents everything, and this time they took me seriously. My dad called the police, who took a report but said there wasn't much they could do since the man hadn't actually done anything illegal. They suggested I stop running alone and vary my schedule. But I was angry. Why should I have to change my routine because some creep was stalking me? The next day my dad took the day off work. He told me to go for my usual run, and he would follow at a distance in his car. Sure enough, about a mile into my run, the blue sedan appeared. But this time my dad was ready. He got the license plate and followed the car when it left. The car led him to a house just a few streets over from ours. My dad called the police with the information, and they discovered that the man living there had a history of harassment and stalking charges. He had moved to our neighborhood just a month before I came home for the summer. The police visited him and warned him to stop following me. They couldn't arrest him, but they made it clear they were watching. I never saw the blue sedan again during my runs, but I also never felt safe running in that neighborhood again. I spent the rest of the summer running on the treadmill at the gym, surrounded by people, never alone. It still makes me angry that one person's disturbing behavior took away something I loved. Running had always been my freedom, my time to think and push myself. Now it was tainted with fear and the knowledge that someone had been watching me, following me, for reasons I don't even want to imagine. The Trail Runner's Close Call. My name is Derek, and I'm what you'd call an ultra runner. I don't just run 5 Burmese Chats or marathons, I run 50-mile races through mountains and wilderness areas. Training for these races means spending hours alone on remote trails, pushing my body to its limits. I live near a national forest with hundreds of miles of trails. It's a runner's paradise, endless paths through beautiful wilderness, challenging terrain and stunning views. I've been running these trails for 8 years and thought I knew every inch of them. My favorite training route was a 20-mile loop that took me deep into the forest. It started at a small parking area, climbed steadily for the first 8 miles, traversed a high ridge with incredible views, then descended back through a different valley. On a good day I could complete it in about 3 hours. One Saturday in September, I set out early for this loop. I wanted to get started before the day hikers crowded the trails. I signed the register at the trailhead, a safety measure for solo hikers, and began the long climb. The first few miles were uneventful. The forest was peaceful, with morning mist still clinging to the valleys below. I was in a good rhythm, breathing steadily, feeling strong. I passed a few other early risers heading up the trail and exchanged the usual hiker greetings. About 5 miles in, the trail became more remote. This section saw less traffic because it was steeper and more challenging. I liked the solitude, it was just me, the trail, and the sound of my own breathing. That's when I first noticed something odd. There were fresh footprints in a muddy section of trail, but they were going the wrong direction. The prints showed someone had gone up the trail, then turned around and gone back down, then up again. It looked like they had been pacing back and forth. I didn't think too much of it. Maybe someone had gotten tired and turned back, then changed their mind. But about a half-mile later, I saw the same pattern again. Fresh footprints going back and forth like someone was walking up the trail, then backtracking, then going forward again. Now I was alert. This wasn't normal hiker behavior. I slowed my pace and started paying more attention to my surroundings. The forest, which had felt peaceful minutes before, now seemed full of hiding places. Every shadow could conceal someone, every rustle in the bushes made me tense. I reached the ridge traverse, the highest and most remote part of the trail. This section was narrow, with steep drops on one side and dense forest on the other. As I rounded a blind corner, I nearly ran into a man standing in the middle of the trail. He was tall and thin, wearing dirty hiking clothes that looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks. His hair was long and matted, and he had a wild look in his eyes. He was holding a large stick like a club, and he didn't move when he saw me. "Morning," I said, trying to keep my voice steady as I attempted to pass him on the narrow trail. He stepped to block my path. "You're not supposed to be here," he said. His voice was rough, like he hadn't spoken in a long time. "It's a public trail," I replied, taking a step back. Every instinct was screaming at me to run, but on this narrow section I'd have to get past him first. "My trail," he said, raising the stick. "I live here. This is mine." I realized this might be one of those people who illegally camp in the national forest, sometimes for months or years. They can become territorial and dangerous, especially if they're mentally unstable or on drugs. "Okay, no problem," I said, continuing to back away. "I'll just go back the way I came." "No," he shouted, stepping toward me. "You've seen me. You'll tell them. They'll make me leave." That's when I knew I was in serious trouble. This man saw me as a threat to whatever life he'd built out here. I had two choices: try to get past him on the narrow trail or go back the way I came and hope he didn't follow. I chose to run backward, spinning around and sprinting down the trail I just climbed. Behind me, I heard him yell and start running after me. But I had an advantage. I was in peak physical condition and knew these trails perfectly. He might live out here, but I trained out here. I ran faster than I'd ever run on a technical trail, leaping over rocks and roots, taking dangerous risks on the steep descent. I could hear him crashing through the brush behind me, but the sounds grew fainter as I increased the distance between us. After about 2 miles of all-out running, I couldn't hear him anymore. But I didn't slow down. I took a different trail at the next junction, one that would get me back to my car faster, even though it meant bushwhacking through some rough terrain. When I finally reached the parking area, I was exhausted and shaking with adrenaline. I called the rangers immediately and reported what had happened. They organized a search team and found an illegal campsite near where I'd encountered the man. There was evidence he'd been living there for months. They never caught him. When the rangers arrived at his camp, he was gone, leaving behind a disturbing collection of items including several driver's licenses from hikers who had gone missing in the area over the past year. I still run trails, but never alone on remote routes anymore. I carry a GPS beacon, pepper spray, and always let someone know exactly where I'm going. That encounter taught me that the biggest danger in the wilderness isn't always wildlife or weather. Sometimes it's other people who've chosen to live outside society's rules. The Neighborhood Watch. I'm Rebecca, and I've lived in the same suburban neighborhood for 15 years. It's one of those places where everyone knows everyone, kids play in the streets, and crime is basically non-existent. I felt completely safe running alone at any hour of the day or night. I had a regular 5-mile route that I'd been running for years. It wound through the neighborhood streets, past the elementary school, around the small lake in the center of the development, and back home. I knew every crack in the sidewalk, every barking dog, every sprinkler schedule. Most evenings, I'd see the same people: Tom walking his ancient beagle, Mrs. Chen watering her roses, the Johnson kids playing basketball in their driveway. It was comfortable and predictable, which is exactly what I wanted from my daily run. Things started changing about 6 months ago. I began noticing someone new on my runs, a young man probably in his 20s, who seemed to be out walking whenever I was running. At first, I thought he must have just moved to the neighborhood. I'd smile and wave as I passed, trying to be friendly, but he never responded. He'd just stare at me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. After a few weeks, I realized he wasn't just randomly out walking when I was running. He was following my route. I'd see him at different points along my path, always watching, always silent. Sometimes he'd be walking in the same direction as me, staying about 100 feet back. Other times he'd be coming toward me, forcing me to pass close by him on the sidewalk. I tried changing my route, but he seemed to know the neighborhood as well as I did. No matter which streets I took, he'd appear somewhere along the way. I tried running at different times, but within a day or two he'd adjust his schedule to match mine. The really creepy part was that he never did anything overtly threatening. He just watched and followed. When I mentioned it to my husband, he offered to run with me, but his work schedule rarely allowed it. He suggested I talk to some neighbors to see if anyone knew who this guy was. That's when things got really strange. None of my neighbors had ever seen him. Tom, who walked his dog 3 times a day and knew everyone in a 5-block radius, had no idea who I was talking about. Mrs. Chin, the unofficial neighborhood watch captain, hadn't noticed any new residents. It was like this person only existed during my runs. I started carrying pepper spray and my phone in my hand instead of my armband. I tried to get photos of him, but whenever I'd slow down or stop to aim my phone, he'd turn away or duck behind something. The few blurry pictures I managed to get showed a generic-looking young man that could have been anyone. One evening, I decided to confront him. I was tired of feeling hunted in my own neighborhood. When I saw him on the path around the lake, I stopped running and walked straight toward him. As I got closer, he didn't move, just stood there watching me approach. "Can I help you?" I called out when I was about 20 feet away. "I've noticed you're out here every time I run." He tilted his head slightly, like he was confused by the question. Up close, I could see his eyes were a pale gray, almost colorless. He was wearing clean but nondescript clothes, jeans and a plain t-shirt. "I like to walk," he said finally. His voice was soft, almost whispered. "Are you new to the neighborhood?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the alarm bells going off in my head. "I've been here longer than you think," he replied. Then he smiled, a small, unsettling smile that didn't reach those pale eyes. "You run the same route every day. That's dangerous, you know." Predictable. The way he said it sent chills down my spine. It wasn't advice, it was a threat disguised as concern. I took a step back, my hand moving to the pepper spray in my pocket. "I should go," I said, starting to move past him. "See you tomorrow, Rebecca," he said quietly as I passed. I froze. I had never told him my name. I sprinted home faster than I'd ever run, my heart pounding with fear. When I got home, I was in tears. My husband wanted to call the police immediately, but what would we say? That someone knew my name and walked in the neighborhood? That night, we installed security cameras around our house. I stopped running outside entirely, joining a gym instead. But the cameras picked up something disturbing. The man would still walk by our house every evening at the time I used to run. He'd slow down as he passed, sometimes stopping to stare at the house for a few seconds before moving on. We finally called the police after 2 weeks of this. They increased patrols in the area and spoke to the man when they spotted him. He gave them a name and address that turned out to be fake. When they tried to find him again, he had vanished. I never saw him again, but I also never felt safe running in my neighborhood again. Even now, months later, I wonder who he was and what he wanted. Was he dangerous or just disturbed? Would he have eventually done something, or was the watching and following all he intended? I'll never know, and in some ways that's the worst part. The not knowing, the unanswered questions, the permanent loss of feeling safe in my own neighborhood. I still run, but only on the treadmill at the gym, surrounded by people and security cameras. It's not the same as running outside, feeling the wind and sun, but at least I feel safe. The college campus predator. My name is Jordan, and I was a sophomore at a large state university when this happened. The campus was huge, with beautiful tree-lined paths connecting all the buildings. I was on the cross-country team, so running was a major part of my daily life. Our team practiced together in the afternoons, but we were expected to do easy recovery runs on our own in the mornings. Most of us had our favorite routes around campus. Mine was a 6-mile loop that went through the main quad, around the athletic facilities, through a wooded area with trails, and past the student housing complexes. I usually ran early, around 6 a.m., when the campus was quiet except for other athletes and a few dedicated students heading to the library. It was peaceful and felt completely safe. After all, campus security was always patrolling, and there were emergency call boxes every few hundred yards. One morning in early November, I was doing my usual loop when I noticed someone running behind me. This wasn't unusual, lots of people ran the same paths I did. But something about this runner bothered me. They were matching my pace exactly, staying about 50 yards back. When I sped up to test them, they sped up. When I slowed down, they slowed down. They were wearing all black with a hood up, which seemed weird for a runner. Most of us wore bright colors for visibility and safety. I decided to change my route, taking a turn I normally didn't take. The runner followed. Now I was getting nervous. I picked up the pace significantly, running much faster than I normally would for an easy run. The person behind me kept up. As I approached the wooded trail section of my route, I made a split-second decision to skip it and stay on the main paths where there would be more people. But as I passed the trail entrance, the person behind me called out, "Hey, wait up." Against my better judgment, I slowed down and looked back. The runner had pulled down his hood, revealing a guy who looked like a typical college student. He jogged up to me with a friendly smile. "Sorry, didn't mean to freak you out," he said. "I'm new to the running thing and was just trying to keep pace with someone who obviously knows what they're doing. Mind if I run with you?" He seemed harmless enough and I felt silly for being paranoid. "Sure," I said, though something still felt off. We ran together for about a quarter mile, making small talk. He said he was a transfer student, asked about good running routes, commented on the weather. Normal stuff, but there was something in the way he kept glancing at me that made me uncomfortable. When we reached a fork in the path, I said I was heading left back to my dorm. He said he was going right to the gym. We said goodbye and split up. I watched him jog away, then doubled back and took a different route home just to be safe. The next morning he was waiting at the spot where we'd met up the day before. "Morning," he called out cheerfully. "Ready for another run?" I hadn't agreed to run with him again, but I didn't want to be rude. We ran together, and again he seemed normal enough, just overly interested in my running schedule, my classes, where I lived on campus. This became a pattern. Every morning he'd be waiting somewhere along my route. If I changed my starting time, he'd somehow know and adjust. If I took a completely different path, he'd find me. He always had an explanation: "Oh, I was just heading this way anyway," or "What a coincidence." I started to feel like I was being stalked, but when I told my teammates, they said I was overreacting. He hadn't done anything threatening, hadn't touched me or said anything inappropriate. Maybe he just had a crush and didn't know how to express it normally. But then things escalated. One morning I decided to run on the indoor track to avoid him. When I got there at 5:45 a.m., he was already there, stretching by the entrance. "Great idea," he said. "Much warmer in here." That's when I knew this wasn't coincidence or a harmless crush. He was tracking me somehow. I left immediately and went to campus security. They took my report seriously and said they'd look into it. The next day I got a call from security. They'd identified the guy from security camera footage, and he wasn't a student. He had no affiliation with the university at all. He'd been sneaking onto campus every morning, and they'd found evidence he'd been following other female runners too. When security tried to find him the next morning, he was gone. They increased patrols and sent out a campus-wide alert with his photo. Several other women came forward saying they'd seen him watching them run or had uncomfortable encounters with him. He was never caught, but he also never came back to campus. I had to run with a buddy for the rest of the semester, always looking over my shoulder, always wondering if he was out there watching from somewhere. The experience taught me that predators don't always look dangerous. They can seem perfectly normal, friendly even. They count on people being polite, not wanting to make a scene, doubting their own instincts. Now I trust my gut feelings and I don't care if I seem rude or paranoid. Better safe than sorry. The Desert Runner's Discovery. I'm Miguel, and I live in Arizona, where running in the desert requires careful planning. You have to go early in the morning or late in the evening to avoid the heat, carry plenty of water, and stick to known trails because getting lost in the desert can be fatal. I had a favorite route in the desert preserve near my home, a 10-mile loop that offered challenging terrain and beautiful scenery. I'd been running it twice a week for 3 years and knew every cactus, every rock formation, every turn in the trail. One morning I set out at 5 a.m. to beat the heat. The desert is incredibly peaceful at that hour, just the sound of your footsteps on the sandy trail and maybe some early rising birds. The sun was just starting to paint the mountains pink as I began the gradual climb into the foothills. About 4 miles in, I noticed something off the trail that caught my eye. It looked like a piece of bright fabric caught on a Palo Verde tree. Thinking it might be litter, I left the trail to pick it up. As I got closer, I realized it was a running shirt, torn and dirty but still recognizable as technical running gear. Something about finding that shirt made me uneasy. Runners don't just leave their shirts in the desert. I looked around more carefully and noticed what might have been a faint path through the brush. Against my better judgment, I followed it. About 50 yards from the main trail, I found a small clearing that made my blood run cold. There were more pieces of running gear scattered around: shoes, a hydration pack, what looked like a GPS watch. They were arranged almost like a shrine, laid out carefully on a flat rock. But that wasn't the worst part. On a large boulder at the edge of the clearing, someone had used what looked like charcoal to draw pictures. Crude drawings of runners, stick figures, but clearly meant to represent people running. And below each figure was a date. I counted 7 figures with 7 dates spanning the past 2 years. The most recent date was only a week ago. I recognized that date. A local runner had gone missing that day. They'd found her a few days later, said she'd gotten lost and died of dehydration, but her body was found miles from any known trail. I took photos of everything with my phone, then got out of there as fast as I could. I ran back to the main trail and sprinted the remaining 6 miles to my car, constantly looking over my shoulder, expecting someone to jump out from behind every rock and cactus. I went straight to the police with the photos. They took me seriously, especially when I showed them the dates corresponding to missing runners. They organized a search team to go back to the site, but when they got there, everything was gone. The clearing had been swept clean, no sign of the items I'd photographed. But my photos were enough to reopen several missing person cases. The authorities started looking at the deaths differently, considering the possibility that someone was targeting runners in the desert. They increased ranger patrols and posted warnings at all the trailheads. I never ran that trail again. In fact, I stopped running in the desert entirely, sticking to urban paths and treadmills. The police never found who was responsible for that disturbing shrine, but the number of runners going missing in that area dropped to 0 after the increased security. Sometimes I think about those drawings on the rock, those dates marking someone's sick tally of victims. I wonder if the person responsible is still out there, maybe in a different desert, a different state, continuing their hunt. The thought keeps me up at night sometimes. Final thoughts: when running becomes survival. These stories share common threads that every runner should pay attention to. In each case, the victims noticed warning signs, someone following them, unusual behavior, things that just didn't feel right. The difference between those who escaped harm and those who might not have often came down to trusting their instincts and taking action. Running makes us vulnerable. We're often alone, in predictable patterns, focused on our exercise rather than our surroundings. Predators know this and use it to their advantage. They study our routes, learn our schedules, and wait for the perfect opportunity. But we don't have to give up running. We just need to be smart about it. Vary your routes and times. Run with others when possible. Carry protection and a way to call for help. Tell someone where you're going and when you'll be back. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Most importantly, don't be afraid to seem rude or paranoid. Your safety is more important than being polite to a stranger. If someone makes you uncomfortable, remove yourself from the situation. If you're being followed, go somewhere public and safe. If you see something suspicious, report it. These runners survived their encounters because they recognized danger and took action. They didn't ignore the warning signs or talk themselves out of their fears. They trusted their instincts and did what they needed to do to stay safe. Running should be a source of joy, health, and freedom. Don't let fear take that away from you. But also don't let complacency make you an easy target. Be aware, be prepared, and be safe. The reality is that most runs are completely safe and uneventful. Millions of people run every day without incident. But for those who do encounter danger, being prepared and aware can mean the difference between a scary story and a tragedy. So lace up your shoes, hit the trails or streets, and enjoy your run. But keep your eyes open, your phone charged, and your instincts sharp. Because you never know when your daily run might turn into a race for survival. Stay safe out there, runners. The most important finish line is the one that brings you home. I was 17 during my senior year of high school. Our school had recently installed a new security system after some incidents at nearby schools. Every classroom had panic buttons, reinforced doors, and we practiced lockdown drills monthly. Nobody really took them seriously though. We all thought nothing would actually happen at our quiet suburban school. It was a Tuesday in March. I remember because we had a big chemistry test that day. Third period had just started when our teacher Mrs. Chen was writing formulas on the board. That's when we heard it, not the usual 3 bells for a drill, but a continuous alarm we'd never heard before. Then came the automated voice over the intercom. This is not a drill. Lockdown procedures are now in effect. Mrs. Chen's face went pale. She rushed to lock the door and turn off the lights. We all huddled in the corner away from the windows just like we'd practiced. But this time was different. This time, everyone was dead silent. Sarah, who usually never stopped talking, was gripping my arm so tight it hurt. Mike, the class clown, had tears in his eyes. We sat there for what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes. Then we heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate footsteps that would stop right outside our door. We held our breath. The doorknob rattled. Someone was trying to get in. Mrs. Chen put her finger to her lips, reminding us to stay quiet. The footsteps moved on. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my friend Tyler, who was in the library. Someone's in here with us. We can hear them moving around. My heart dropped. The library was just down the hall from us. I showed the text to Mrs. Chin, who took out her own phone and started texting someone, probably the front office. Another text from Tyler, "They're getting closer. We're hiding behind the reference desk." Then nothing. I kept staring at my phone, waiting for another message. 5 minutes passed. 10 minutes. Still nothing. Suddenly, we heard shouting from somewhere in the building. It sounded like it was coming from downstairs. Then running footsteps, lots of them. Were those police? The person causing the lockdown? We couldn't tell. Mrs. Chen's phone lit up. She read the message and relief washed over her face. "The police are in the building," she whispered. "Stay where you are." We waited another 30 minutes before the all-clear announcement came over the intercom. When we finally stood up, my legs were so stiff I could barely walk. As we filed out of the classroom, I saw police officers stationed throughout the hallway. They were checking each room, making sure everyone was okay. I found Tyler in the main lobby. He was shaken but unharmed. He told me that whoever had been in the library had tried to open the door to their hiding spot but hadn't found them. The police had arrived just in time. Later we learned what had happened. A man had entered through a side door that a student had propped open to sneak back in after leaving campus for lunch. He'd been wandering the halls, trying doors, looking for, we never found out what. The police caught him on the second floor. He had no weapons, but he'd been recently released from a psychiatric facility and had stopped taking his medication. The whole experience changed how we viewed those drills. They weren't just annoying interruptions anymore. They were practice for something that could actually happen. The school made changes too. No more prop doors, more security cameras, and a full-time police officer on campus. I graduated a few months later, but I'll never forget that day. The fear, the uncertainty, the relief when it was over. It taught me that safety isn't something to take for granted. 10 years have passed since that day, and now I'm a teacher myself. It's strange being on the other side of those drills. I see my students rolling their eyes, thinking it's just another waste of time, and I remember being exactly like them. My first teaching job was at a middle school in the city. Very different from my suburban high school experience. The neighborhood had its challenges, but the kids were great, full of energy and curiosity, even if they didn't always channel it in the right direction. I'd been teaching there for about 6 months when we had our first real lockdown. It was a Friday afternoon, last period of the day. I was teaching 7th grade English and we were reading The Outsiders. The kids were actually engaged for once, debating whether Ponyboy should have run away. The lockdown alarm cut through our discussion. I saw the same transformation in my students that I'd experienced years before. The jokes stopped, the chatter died, and suddenly they were just scared kids looking to me for reassurance. I locked the door, turned off the lights, and guided them to our designated corner. One of my students, Marcus, started to panic. He had anxiety issues and the confined space was making it worse. I knelt beside him, keeping my voice calm and steady, reminding him to breathe. "Is this real, Ms. Johnson?" whispered Aisha, one of my brightest students. "We have to treat it like it's real," I told her, "but everything's going to be okay." I wasn't sure I believed my own words. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone to check for updates from the administration. Nothing yet. We could hear sirens outside, lots of them. That wasn't normal for a drill. Some of the kids started crying quietly. I wanted to comfort them, but I had to stay focused on keeping everyone safe and calm. Then we heard it, a loud bang from somewhere in the building. It sounded like a door slamming, but in that moment, everyone's mind went to the worst possibility. I felt Marcus tense up beside me. I put my hand on his shoulder, trying to project a calm I didn't feel. My phone finally buzzed with a message from the principal. "Police are searching the building. Possible intruder. Stay in lockdown." I had to make a decision. Do I tell the students what I knew or keep it to myself? I chose honesty but with reassurance. "The police are here," I whispered. "They're making sure everyone is safe. We just need to stay quiet and wait." Time crawled by. Every little sound made us jump. The air conditioning kicking on sounded like footsteps. A locker slamming in the distance might as well have been a gunshot. I kept checking my phone, both hoping for and dreading updates. After what felt like an eternity but was probably 45 minutes, the all-clear came through. But it wasn't over the intercom. A police officer knocked on our door and identified himself. I'd never been so relieved to see a uniform. As it turned out, there had been an incident at the high school next door. A student had brought a weapon to school and threatened another student. They'd fled the high school campus, and there was concern they might have entered our building. They hadn't, they'd been caught a few blocks away, but the threat had been real enough. That weekend, I couldn't stop thinking about my students' faces during the lockdown. The fear, the trust they'd placed in me. I'd done my best, but I felt so unprepared for the weight of that responsibility. I started researching, taking additional training courses on emergency procedures, trauma-informed teaching, and how to support students through crisis situations. I learned that what we'd experienced, even though no one was physically hurt, could still be traumatic, especially for kids who already dealt with violence in their neighborhoods. When we returned to school Monday, I made time to talk with my students about what had happened. Some were angry, some were scared, and some tried to act like it was no big deal. But they all needed to process it in some way. Marcus, who'd struggled with panic during the lockdown, came to talk to me after class. He thanked me for helping him through it and asked if we could work on some coping strategies for if it happened again. That conversation led to a broader discussion with the school counselor about supporting students with anxiety during emergency situations. That experience at the middle school shaped my approach to teaching and safety. When I moved to a high school position a few years later, I brought those lessons with me. I volunteered to be part of the safety committee, helping to refine our emergency procedures and train other teachers. It was at this high school where I experienced my third lockdown, and the most unusual one. It was during winter, one of those gray January days where the sun never really seems to come up. I was teaching sophomore literature, and we were in the middle of discussing To Kill a Mockingbird when the lockdown alarm sounded. By now the routine was automatic. Locked door, lights off, students to the corner. But something felt different this time. There was something in the air, a tension I couldn't quite place. My co-teacher, Mr. Roberts, was in the room with me that day. We exchanged glances as we got the students settled. He felt it too. The first strange thing was the announcement. Usually they'd say lockdown drill or lockdown. This time the automated voice said, shelter in place. This is not a drill. Await further instructions. Shelter in place was different from a lockdown. It usually meant there was some kind of environmental hazard, maybe a chemical spill nearby or severe weather. But the weather was just gray, not dangerous. I checked my phone for updates from administration. Nothing. That was unusual too. By now, we usually had some information. Then the lights went out. Not just the classroom lights, all the lights. The emergency lighting kicked in, casting everything in an eerie red glow. The students started murmuring nervously. Power outage, Mr. Roberts said calmly. The backup generators are working. But I'd been through power outages at school before. The emergency lights were white, not red. And the lockdown alarm was still going. It should have stopped if we'd lost power. I tried to check my phone again, but I had no signal. Neither did Mr. Roberts. That's when the real anxiety set in. We were completely cut off from information. One of my students, Beth, raised her hand. Even in an emergency, some habits persist. Ms. Johnson, my insulin pump is beeping. I think I need to check my blood sugar. This was exactly the kind of situation I'd trained for after my experience at the middle school. Medical needs don't stop during emergencies. I made the decision to let her check her levels using the light from her phone. I'm okay for now, she reported, but if this goes on much longer? I made a mental note to address this with administration if needed. We had protocols for students with medical needs during extended lockdowns, but they assumed we'd have communication with the nurse's office. Time passed strangely in that red-lit room. Without clocks or phones working properly, we lost track of whether minutes or hours were passing. I tried to keep the students calm by talking quietly with them, but I was fighting my own growing unease. Then we heard something that made everyone freeze, footsteps above us. We were on the second floor. There shouldn't be anyone above us. The footsteps were slow, methodical. They seemed to be following a pattern: walk, stop, like someone was checking each room. Mr. Roberts and I exchanged another look. He moved closer to the door while I stayed with the students. If someone tried to get in, he'd be the first line of defense. The footsteps got closer. They were definitely on our floor now. We could hear doors being tried, rattled. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. The footsteps stopped right outside our door. The handle turned slowly. Once, twice, then stopped. We all held our breath. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps moved on. It was another hour before the lights suddenly came back on and our phones started working again. The all-clear announcement followed shortly after. When we finally emerged from the classroom, the hallways were full of confused students and teachers. Nobody seemed to know what had actually happened. It wasn't until the next day that we got an explanation, sort of. The administration told us there had been a security system malfunction, combined with a power issue. The red emergency lights were part of a new system that had activated incorrectly. The person checking doors? A security guard who'd been doing his rounds when his radio stopped working due to the same malfunction. But something about the explanation didn't sit right with many of us. The security guard said he'd never been on the third floor, yet we'd clearly heard footsteps above us. The district claimed the phone outage was related to the power issue, but cell towers have their own power supplies. Some teachers quit after that incident. Others, like me, stayed but remained wary. We'd followed all our procedures perfectly, but the system itself had failed us in ways we hadn't anticipated. I learned an important lesson that day. You can prepare for the scenarios you can imagine, but there will always be situations that fall outside your planning. The best you can do is stay calm, use your judgment, and protect the people in your care. Now, 20 years into my teaching career, I've been through more lockdowns than I care to count. Most are drills. Some are false alarms. A few have been real. Each one leaves its mark, both on me and on my students. I think about how the world has changed since I was that scared 17-year-old huddled in a chemistry classroom. The threats feel different now, more complex. It's not just about intruders anymore. We prepare for so many possibilities: severe weather, chemical hazards, medical emergencies during lockdowns, even cyber threats that can affect our physical security systems. But what hasn't changed is the human element. The fear in a student's eyes during their first real lockdown. The trust they place in us as teachers. The relief when the all-clear finally comes. The need to process and heal afterward. I've made it my mission to help prepare new teachers for these realities. I run workshops on emergency preparedness, but I focus on the emotional and psychological aspects as much as the procedural ones. I tell them about Marcus and his panic attacks, about Beth and her insulin pump, about the importance of staying human even while following protocols. I share my stories, all of them. The straightforward ones and the strange ones. The times the system worked and the times it failed. Because each experience taught me something valuable. Most importantly, I teach them that behind every drill, every procedure, every protocol, there are real people, scared kids who need us to be their anchor in the storm. That's the responsibility we take on as educators in this modern world. Last week we had another lockdown drill. As I guided my current students to our safe corner, I saw myself in their faces, some bored, some anxious, some taking it seriously, others definitely not. And I thought about all the lockdowns I've been through, all the moments of fear and uncertainty, all the lessons learned. When the drill was over and we returned to our lesson, one of my students asked, "Ms. Johnson, have you ever been in a real lockdown?" I paused, considering how much to share. Then I said, "Yes, I have. Several times. And that's why we practice, so if it ever happens we'll all know what to do." She nodded, satisfied with the answer. But I could see her looking at the lockdown corner differently now, perhaps imagining what it would be like if the alarm was real. That's the world we live in now. Where lockdown drills are as routine as fire drills. Where teachers carry the weight of being protectors as well as educators. Where students grow up knowing that sometimes school isn't the safe haven it should be. But we adapt. We prepare. We support each other. And we never stop hoping for a day when all our lockdowns are just drills, when the biggest emergency is a forgotten homework assignment, when the only thing we need to protect our students from is the challenge of learning itself. Until that day comes, I'll keep teaching. I'll keep preparing. And I'll keep being the calm voice in the corner, telling scared kids that everything is going to be okay, and doing everything in my power to make that promise true. The last bookstore. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. Maya pressed her forehead against the cold window of the bookstore, watching the empty street outside. Water rushed along the gutters like tiny rivers, carrying leaves and debris toward the storm drains that were already overwhelmed. "Any customers today?" asked Harold from behind the counter, though he already knew the answer. "Not since Tuesday," Maya replied, turning away from the window. "Maybe we should just close early." Harold shook his head, his gray beard swaying with the motion. "We stay open until 8. That's what the sign says, that's what we do." Maya had worked at Chapters and Verse for 2 years now, ever since she dropped out of college. It wasn't supposed to be permanent, just something to pay the bills while she figured out what to do with her life. But somewhere between organizing the poetry section and recommending novels to regular customers, she'd fallen in love with the place. The bookstore occupied a narrow building squeezed between a dry cleaner and a shop that had changed hands so many times Maya couldn't remember what it currently sold. The floor creaked with every step, the shelves were made of dark wood that had seen better days, and the whole place smelled of old paper and vanilla, a scent Maya now associated with home more than her actual apartment. "I'll go check the delivery in the back," she said, needing something to do besides stare at empty aisles. The stockroom was even quieter than the front of the store. Boxes of new releases sat unopened, waiting for customers who might never come. Maya ran her finger along one box, leaving a line in the dust. They'd been there for a week. She heard the bell above the front door chime and hurried back out, hope rising in her chest. But it was just Mrs. Chen shaking water from her umbrella. "Terrible weather," the elderly woman said, smiling despite being soaked. "I was worried you might be closed." "Never," Harold said warmly. "What can we help you find today?" Mrs. Chen had been coming to the store for 15 years, long before Maya started working there. She bought a book every Friday, usually a mystery novel, sometimes a cookbook, occasionally something completely random that caught her eye. "I finished the one about the detective in Tokyo," she said, producing a slightly damp paperback from her bag. "It was wonderful. What else do you have by the same author?" Maya led her to the mystery section while Harold returned to his perpetual task of organizing receipts. The store might be struggling, but he ran it like they were still in their heyday 20 years ago when there had been lines at the register every weekend. "Here," Maya said, pulling a book from the shelf. "This is her newest one. Set in Osaka this time." Mrs. Chen took the book, turning it over to read the back cover. "Perfect. You always know exactly what I'll like." That was the thing about working in a bookstore. After a while, you learned your customers' tastes better than they knew them themselves. Maya could predict what Mrs. Chen would buy, knew that teenager Jamie only read fantasy with female protagonists, and that Mr. Rivera would spend hours in the history section but only buy books about World War II. As Mrs. Chen paid for her book, Maya noticed Harold wince when the register drawer opened. She'd seen the bills piling up on his desk, each envelope marked with increasingly urgent stamps. The truth they'd both been avoiding was becoming impossible to ignore. The store was dying. After Mrs. Chen left, the afternoon stretched endlessly. Maya dusted shelves that were already clean, rearranged displays that didn't need rearranging, and tried not to think about what would happen when the store finally closed. "You should go home," Harold said around 6. "No point in both of us sitting here." "I don't mind staying." "Go," he insisted. "Get some dinner. Do something fun. You're young, you shouldn't be spending your Friday nights in an empty bookstore." Maya wanted to argue, but she could see the sadness in his eyes. He wanted to be alone with his store, maybe to say goodbye in his own way. She gathered her things slowly, reluctant to leave. At the door she turned back. "Harold? What will you do?" "When?" "When we close." He smiled sadly. "I honestly don't know. This place has been my whole life for 25 years. The rain had finally stopped when Maya stepped outside, but the air still felt heavy with moisture. She walked slowly, taking a different route home than usual. She wasn't ready to be in her empty apartment yet. That's when she saw it, a piece of paper stuck to a telephone pole, the ink running from the rain but still readable. "Save chapters and verse. Community meeting Saturday 2 p.m. Maya's heart jumped. She looked around and saw more flyers on other poles and shop windows, taped to parking meters. Someone was trying to save the bookstore. She pulled out her phone and took a picture of the flyer, then hurried home to search online. She found a Facebook page created just that day, Save Our Bookstore. It already had 50 members. The organizer was listed as Jamie Patel, the fantasy reading teenager. Maya clicked on her profile and sent a message, "I work at Chapters and Verse. How can I help?" The response came within minutes, "Ms. Maya, I'm so glad you saw the flyers. Can you meet tomorrow before the meeting? We need inside information about what the store needs to survive." That night, Maya barely slept. She made lists of ideas, calculated rough estimates of how much money they'd need to raise, and thought about all the people who'd been customers over the years. By morning she had a plan. She arrived at the store early Saturday, finding Harold already there, staring at the same flyer she'd seen. "Did you know about this?" he asked. "Not until last night." "Harold, I think we should." "No." His voice was firm. "I appreciate what that girl is trying to do, but I won't take charity. I won't beg people to shop here out of pity." "It's not pity," Maya argued. "It's community. This store matters to people." Before Harold could respond, Jamie arrived with 2 other teenagers and a laptop. "Mr. Harold, did you see? We already have 100 people saying they'll come to the meeting." Harold's resolve visibly wavered. "I don't know." "Please," Jamie said. "Just let us try. My mom says Chapters and Verse is where she met my dad. They both reached for the same book. And Mrs. Patterson says you special ordered books for her daughter when she was going through chemo, books that weren't even in print anymore. And Mr. Kim credits you with getting his son interested in reading. This place matters." Maya watched Harold's eyes fill with tears. He nodded slowly. "Okay. Let's see what happens." By 2 o'clock the store was packed. Maya recognized faces she hadn't seen in months, maybe years. Former employees, old customers, people from the neighborhood who'd moved away but came back for this. Jamie stood on a chair to address the crowd. Despite her youth, she commanded attention. Chapters and Verse has been part of this community for 25 years. It's where we discovered new worlds, met fellow readers, and found refuge on difficult days. We can't let it disappear. She outlined a plan: a GoFundMe campaign, a series of fundraising events, a push to get more people shopping local. Someone suggested a monthly book club. Another person offered to organize author readings. A local artist volunteered to paint a mural on the side of the building to attract attention. "I can talk to my publisher contacts," said a woman Maya recognized as a local author. "Maybe we can make this an official stop on some book tours." Ideas flew around the room. A used book sale in the parking lot. A partnership with the schools for summer reading programs. A coffee corner to compete with the big chains. Everyone had something to contribute. Maya looked at Harold. He was overwhelmed, tears streaming down his face as he listened to person after person explain what his store meant to them. "I started my business in the back office here," said a man in a suit. "Harold let me use his computer and printer when I couldn't afford my own. Now I run a tech company with 50 employees. It's time I paid that forward." The meeting lasted 3 hours. By the end, they had committees formed, events planned for the next 6 months, and pledges totaling enough to cover 2 months of rent. It wasn't everything they needed, but it was a start. As people filtered out, many stopped to buy books. The register rang more times that afternoon than it had in the previous 2 weeks combined. "I can't believe this," Harold kept saying. "I just can't believe it." Jamie stayed to help clean up, her energy unflagging. "This is just the beginning, Mr. Harold. Wait until you see what we do next week." Over the following months, the bookstore transformed. Not physically, it still had the creaky floors and old wooden shelves, but in spirit. The place came alive again. The monthly book club drew 40 people to its first meeting. They had to move extra chairs from the stockroom to accommodate everyone. The author reading started small but grew as word spread. Local newspapers picked up the story of the community saving its bookstore. Maya took charge of social media, something Harold had always resisted. She posted pictures of new arrivals, staff recommendations, and quotes from books. Their followers grew from 0 to 5,000 in 2 months. The coffee corner became reality when a local roaster offered to partner with them. The aroma of fresh coffee mixed with the book's smell created something magical. People started coming in just to work on their laptops, and most left with a book or two. But the real change was in Harold. The sadness that had weighed him down lifted. He smiled more, recommended books with his old enthusiasm, and started planning for the future instead of preparing for the end. One evening, 6 months after that community meeting, Maya was closing up when Harold called her over to his desk. "I've been thinking," he said, "about the future of this place." Maya's stomach dropped. Despite all their progress, she still worried he might decide to close. "I'm not getting any younger," Harold continued, "and this whole experience has taught me something. This store isn't really mine, it belongs to the community. So I've made a decision." He pulled out a folder full of legal documents. "I'm restructuring as a community-owned cooperative. Everyone who invests becomes a partial owner. I'll stay on as manager as long as I'm able, but the store will outlive me." Maya felt tears spring to her eyes. "Harold, that's amazing." "There's one more thing," he said. "I want you to be assistant manager. You've earned it. This place wouldn't have survived without you. It wouldn't have survived without Jamie and everyone else." "True. But you're the one who's here every day, who knows every book on every shelf, who our customers trust. You're the future of this place, Maya." She accepted, of course. How could she not? The temporary job she'd taken while figuring out her life had become her life, and she couldn't imagine doing anything else. The grand reopening as a cooperative drew hundreds of people. The mayor came and gave a speech about the importance of local businesses. Jamie, now in college but home for the event, cut the ribbon. Mrs. Chen bought 5 books to celebrate. As Maya looked around at the packed store, she thought about how close they'd come to losing everything. But the community had refused to let their bookstore die. They'd fought for it, invested in it, and made it their own. The rain was falling again, but this time it didn't matter. The store was full of warmth and light and people who understood that some things were worth saving. Harold appeared at her elbow, watching the crowd with satisfaction. "You know what the best part is?" he said. "What's that?" "We're not just selling books anymore. We're selling community. And that's something the big chains can never replicate." Maya nodded, watching a child discover a picture book while their parent chatted with another customer about recommendations. In the poetry corner, a teenager sat reading, lost in words. By the window, an elderly man browsed the history section with careful attention. This was more than a bookstore now. It was a gathering place, a cultural center, a reminder that communities could still come together to save the things that mattered. The next morning, Maya arrived early to open the store. The shelves were slightly disheveled from the previous day's crowds, a problem she was happy to have. As she straightened books and prepared for another day, she noticed something that made her smile. Someone had left a note tucked into the suggestion box. "Thank you for staying open. This bookstore saved my life when I was going through a dark time." Having a place to escape into books, and people who understood that need, made all the difference. "Now I get to bring my daughter here and she loves it just as much as I do." It was unsigned, but Maya didn't need to know who wrote it. She'd seen that same sentiment in countless faces over the past months. People who needed more than just books. They needed a place that felt like home, people who understood the power of stories, and a community that valued quiet spaces in an increasingly noisy world. She kept the note, adding it to a growing collection in Harold's desk. On difficult days they'd pull them out and read them, reminding themselves why they did this work. By noon the store was buzzing with activity. The book club was meeting in the back corner, discussing their latest selection with passionate debate. A group of students occupied the coffee corner, textbooks spread across tables as they studied for finals. Mrs. Chun was back, browsing the mystery section even though she'd just been there yesterday. "Find anything good?" Maya asked. "Always," Mrs. Chun replied. "But I'm not really here for the books today. My granddaughter is coming to visit next week and I wanted to bring her here. This is the kind of place she needs to see, where people still care about each other." That evening, as Maya was preparing to close, Jamie stopped by. She was home from college for winter break and had been coming in almost daily. "I've been thinking," Jamie said, "about starting a literary magazine. Something that showcases local writers, maybe hosts contests for young authors. We could launch it here at the store." Maya grinned. "I love it. Harold will too. When do you want to start?" "I've already started," Jamie admitted, pulling out a folder full of submissions. "I put out a call on social media last week. We've got enough content for the first issue." This was what Maya loved most about the new version of their bookstore. It had become a launching pad for other people's dreams. The community hadn't just saved the store, they transformed it into something bigger than anyone had imagined. As the weeks turned to months, the bookstore continued to evolve. They hosted wedding proposals in the poetry section, baby showers in the children's area, and even a few first dates among the stacks. The monthly author readings grew so popular they had to start selling tickets, with all proceeds going back into store improvements. Harold, energized by the store's revival, started writing a book about their experience. Chapter 1, he'd say, reading aloud to Maya during slow afternoons, "The day I almost gave up." "That's too depressing," Maya would critique. "Start with the community meeting. Start with hope." Their playful arguments about the book became a regular feature of their days, adding another layer to their friendship. Harold was more than her boss now, he was family just like the store itself. 1 year after the community meeting that saved them, they held a celebration. The store was decorated with photos from the past year, the packed book club meetings, children's story time, author visits, and countless moments of connection between people who'd found each other through books. Harold gave a speech, his voice strong despite his emotion. "A year ago I thought this was ending. I was ready to close the doors and walk away. But you all showed me something I'd forgotten. A bookstore isn't just about selling books. It's about creating a space where stories live, where people connect, where community happens. You didn't just save this store. You saved me." The crowd erupted in applause. Maya watched from behind the counter, tears streaming down her face. She thought about the girl she'd been 2 years ago, lost, unsure of her purpose, taking a temporary job while she figured things out. Now she couldn't imagine being anywhere else. As the celebration continued around her, Maya stepped outside for a moment of quiet. The street looked the same as always, but she saw it differently now. Every storefront represented someone's dream, every apartment window framed someone's story. The bookstore had taught her to see the narrative in everything. Taking a break? It was Jamie joining her outside. "Just thinking," Maya replied, "about how different everything is now. Good different. The best different." They stood in comfortable silence, watching people move in and out of the store. Through the window they could see Harold chatting with customers, his hands moving animatedly as he recommended books. I graduate next year, Jamie said quietly. And I've been thinking. I want to come back. To help run the store. Maybe start that publishing branch we talked about. Turn this place into a real cultural hub. Maya smiled. I think Harold would love that. I know I would. Really? You don't think it's silly? Giving up other opportunities to work in a bookstore? I gave up other opportunities to work in a bookstore, Maya reminded her. It was the best decision I ever made. This place, it's not just a job. It's a calling. Jamie nodded, understanding passing between them. They were the future of Chapters and Verse, the next generation of guardians for this special place. As they headed back inside, Maya felt a profound sense of contentment. The store was full of people, reading, talking, browsing, existing together in a space dedicated to stories. This was what they'd fought for, what they'd built together. The cash register rang steadily, a sound that still made Harold smile every time. Books found new homes, stories found new readers, and people found each other. It was everything a bookstore should be. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the store was quiet, Maya did her final walkthrough. She straightened a few books, turned off the coffee machine, and made sure all the lights were off except the one they always left on in the window, a beacon for any late-night wanderer who might need to know that come morning, the bookstore would be open, ready to welcome them home. As she locked the door and headed home, Maya thought about the note someone had left in the suggestion box that day. This place gives me hope. She understood completely. In a world that often felt too fast, too digital, too disconnected, Chapters and Verse stood as proof that some things endured. Communities still mattered. Stories still had power. And sometimes, when people came together to save something they loved, they created something even better in the process. The bookstore that had almost closed was now thriving, not just as a business but as the heart of a community. And Maya, who had once been lost, had found her purpose among the shelves, between the pages, in the quiet moments and bustling afternoons of a place that sold books but delivered so much more. She smiled as she walked home through the familiar streets. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new stories. But tonight, she was simply grateful. For Harold, for Jamie, for Mrs. Chen and all their customers, for the community that had refused to let their bookstore disappear. Most of all, she was grateful for the discovery that sometimes the life you're meant to live finds you in the most unexpected places. For Maya, that place was a narrow building squeezed between a dry cleaner and an ever-changing shop, where the floors creaked, the shelves were old, and magic happened every single day. The story of Chapters and Verse was far from over. In fact, Maya thought as she climbed the steps to her apartment, it felt like they were just beginning a new chapter. And she couldn't wait to see what would be written on the next page. The Night Watcher. This happened in the winter of 2022 when I moved into a small apartment complex in eastern Ohio. I was 29 years old, fresh out of a long relationship, and looking for a quiet place to start over. The building was nothing special, just a 2-story brick structure with 8 units, surrounded by a parking lot and some scraggly trees. It wasn't fancy, but the rent was cheap and it seemed peaceful enough. My apartment was on the 2nd floor, Unit 2C, with a view of the parking lot and the street beyond. The neighbors seemed normal, mostly working people who kept to themselves. There was Mrs. Chin in 1A who worked at the hospital, a young couple in 2B with a baby, and an older man in 1B who I rarely saw but sometimes heard playing classical music in the evenings. For the first month, everything was perfectly ordinary. I settled into my routine: work at the accounting firm during the day, grocery shopping on weekends, quiet evenings watching Netflix or reading. The building was quiet, the neighbors were polite, and I started to feel like I'd made the right choice. Then I noticed her. She lived across the street in a house with peeling white paint and an overgrown front yard. The house looked abandoned at first glance, newspapers piled up on the porch, weeds everywhere, broken window screen. But someone definitely lived there because I'd see lights on at night, always just one dim light in what looked like the front room. The woman was probably in her 60s, thin and pale with gray hair that hung limp around her face. She wore the same dark coat every day even when it wasn't cold. But what made her stand out wasn't her appearance, it was what she did. Every single night, without fail, she would come out of her house at exactly 11:30 p.m. and stand at the edge of her front yard, facing my building. She would just stand there, completely motionless, for hours. Not looking at anything specific, not doing anything, just standing and staring. At first, I thought maybe she was waiting for someone, a ride, a delivery, something. But as days turned into weeks, I realized this was just what she did. Every night. Same time. Same spot. Same blank stare. I started keeping track. 11:30 p.m., there she was. I'd check again at midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m., still there. I never saw her go back inside. I'd fall asleep and when I'd wake up in the morning she'd be gone. But every evening at 11:30, like clockwork, she'd emerge from that house and take up her position. I mentioned it to my coworker Sarah during lunch one day. She said maybe the woman had dementia or some kind of mental health issue, that I should probably just ignore it. But there was something about the way the woman stood, so perfectly still, so focused, that didn't seem random or confused. It seemed deliberate. After about 6 weeks of this routine, things started to change. Instead of just staring generally at the building, I began to notice she was looking up. Specifically up at the second floor. Specifically at my window. I started closing my blinds every evening before 11:30, but I could still feel her out there. Sometimes I'd peek through the slats and sure enough, there she'd be, facing my window even though she couldn't possibly see inside anymore. Then one night in early March, I was running late coming home from work. I pulled into the parking lot around 11:45 p.m. and there she was in her usual spot. But this time, when my headlights swept across the street, she turned her head and looked directly at my car. Not just a glance, a long, steady stare. Even after I parked and got out, she kept watching me. I hurried up the stairs to my apartment, keys jingling in my nervous hands. That night I couldn't sleep. Something about the direct eye contact had shaken me more than I expected. Around 3 a.m., I got up to get some water and happened to glance out the kitchen window, which faced the back of the building toward the alley. She was there. In the alley behind my building, standing next to the dumpster, looking up at my apartment. My blood went cold. There was no way she could have known which apartment was mine from the front of the building. The units weren't numbered on the outside, and you couldn't see the back windows from her usual spot across the street. But somehow she'd figured out exactly where I lived and had moved to get a better view. I backed away from the window and grabbed my phone. I wasn't sure who to call. The police? What would I say? There's a woman standing in a public alley looking at my building? They'd think I was paranoid. The next morning, I talked to Mrs. Chen when I ran into her getting her mail. I asked if she'd noticed the woman across the street. Mrs. Chen nodded immediately. Oh yes, the night lady. She's been doing that for years, long before you moved in. I asked the previous tenant in your unit about her once. He said she'd been watching his apartment too. Years? I asked. At least 3, maybe 4. Always the same thing. Stands out there every night, always watching the second floor. The police were called once, but she's not on our property and she's not breaking any laws. That evening, I decided to do something about it. At 11:25 p.m., I went downstairs and walked across the street. I wanted to talk to her, to ask her what she wanted, to make it stop. I stood at the edge of her yard and waited. 11:30 came and went. No sign of her. I waited until midnight, but she never came out. I went back to my apartment confused and a little relieved. But when I looked out my bedroom window, there she was, in my parking lot, standing next to my car, looking up at my window. She'd been waiting for me to leave my apartment. Somehow, she'd known I was going to come outside. I ran downstairs, but by the time I got to the parking lot, she was gone. I checked her house, all the lights were off. I walked around the entire building, nothing. She'd vanished. The next night, I decided to stay in and keep watch. I positioned myself by the living room window with the lights off and waited. 11:30 p.m., no sign of her across the street. But at 11:35, I saw movement in the parking lot. She was already down there, walking slowly between the cars like she was looking for something. I watched her for 20 minutes as she moved through the lot, stopping at each car, looking up at the building, then moving on. When she got to my car, she stopped. She placed both hands on the hood and looked up directly at my window. Even though I was sitting in complete darkness, I swear she was looking right at me. That's when I saw her mouth moving. She was saying something, but I was too far away to hear. She kept talking, hands still on my car, eyes still on my window. After about 5 minutes, she stopped, walked to the edge of the parking lot, and disappeared into the shadows. The next morning, there were handprints on my car hood. Not just any handprints, they were pressed into the metal so hard they'd left permanent impressions, like she'd pushed down with inhuman strength. I called the police. They took a report, took photos of the handprints, and said they'd patrol the area more frequently. But they also said unless she actually damaged something or made threats, there wasn't much they could do about someone standing on public property. That night, I packed a bag and stayed at Sarah's place. When I came back the next evening, there was a note tucked under my windshield wiper. It was written in shaky handwriting on yellowed paper. I've been waiting for someone who could see me. Most people look through me like I'm not even there. But you see me, don't you? You watch me watching you. We understand each other. I took the note straight to the police. The officer who'd taken my original report looked concerned for the first time. He said they'd talk to her, but when they went to the house across the street, nobody answered. They looked through the windows and the place appeared empty, no furniture, no personal belongings, nothing. The next day, I talked to Mrs. Chen again. She made some calls to neighbors who'd lived there longer. What she found out made my skin crawl. The house across the street had been empty for over 2 years. The previous owner, an elderly woman, had died in 2020 and the house had been tied up in probate ever since. No one had lived there since then. But Mrs. Chen also found out something else. The woman who used to live there, her name was Margaret Voss, had been known for standing in her front yard at night, watching the apartment building. Neighbors had complained about it for years before she died. I moved out that weekend. Broke my lease, lost my deposit, didn't care. I couldn't stay in that place knowing someone, or something, had been watching me every night for months. But here's the thing that still keeps me awake sometimes. 3 months after I moved, I got a Facebook message from the person who'd moved into my old apartment. It was a young guy named Jake. His message was short. "Hey, I got your info from the landlord. You used to live in 2C, right? There's this weird woman who stands across the street every night staring at the building. Did you ever notice her? She's really starting to freak me out." I never responded. Some things are better left alone. The voice in the walls. I work in building maintenance for a property management company that handles office buildings around the city. It's not glamorous work, but it's steady and I like working with my hands. Most of the time it's routine stuff, changing light bulbs, fixing leaky faucets, replacing air filters. But every once in a while you get a job that sticks with you. This happened in late 2021. I got called to an office building downtown, 15 floors, mostly law firms and accounting companies. The building was probably 30 years old, well-maintained but starting to show its age. The work order said there were reports of strange noises coming from the walls on the 9th floor, and tenants were complaining about disrupted meetings. I figured it was probably mice or maybe some issue with the HVAC system. Old buildings make all kinds of noises, and people who work in quiet offices tend to notice every little sound. I showed up around 7 a.m. on a Tuesday, before most of the offices opened. The building was quiet except for the hum of elevators and air conditioning. I took the elevator to the 9th floor and immediately noticed how different it felt from the other floors. It was colder for one thing, and there was this weird echo in the hallways that I hadn't noticed on other floors. The 9th floor had 6 office suites. I started with the one where most of the complaints had come from, a small law firm called Peterson & Associates. I had keys to all the offices, so I let myself in and started looking around. The layout was typical: a reception area, a few individual offices, a conference room, and a break room. Everything looked normal. I got out my stethoscope, yes, maintenance guys use stethoscopes too, and started listening to the walls, checking for sounds that might indicate problems with pipes or electrical issues. In the main hallway I heard it. A low humming sound, like someone humming a tune very quietly. It was coming from inside the wall, somewhere between the reception area and the first office. At first I thought it might be electrical. Sometimes transformers or ballasts can make musical sounds when they're failing. But this was definitely humming like a human voice. And it had a melody. I marked the spot and moved on to check the other areas. In the conference room I heard it again, but this time it was coming from a different wall. Same humming, same melody, but from a completely different location. That's when I started to feel uneasy. Sounds don't just move around inside walls randomly. I spent another hour checking every wall on the floor, and I kept hearing the humming in different spots. Sometimes it would be in one office, sometimes in another. Sometimes it would be loud enough to hear clearly, sometimes so quiet I had to press my ear against the wall. But it was always the same melody. A simple, repetitive tune that sounded almost like a lullaby. I couldn't identify any obvious source. No loose pipes, no electrical issues, no signs of animals. I filed my report saying I'd investigated but couldn't locate the source of the noise, and recommended bringing in a specialist if the problem continued. The next week I got another work order for the same building. This time the complaints weren't just about humming. People were reporting voices, actual words being spoken inside the walls. Different offices, different times of day, but always the 9th floor. I went back with more equipment this time, an electronic stethoscope that could amplify sounds and a recording device. I wanted to document whatever was happening so I could figure out what was causing it. I started in the law firm again, systematically checking every wall. In the reception area, I heard the humming again, same melody as before. But this time I also heard something else. Very faint, but definitely words being spoken. I couldn't make out what was being said, but it sounded like a conversation, 2 voices going back and forth. I moved to the next office suite and found the same thing. humming and quiet voices having what sounded like a normal conversation. I put on my headphones and cranked up the amplification trying to make out the words. What I heard made my hands shake. One voice was asking questions. What's your name? How old are you? Do you remember what happened? The other voice was answering, but the answers were hard to understand. Like someone speaking through water or from very far away. But I could make out enough to know that the second voice sounded like a child. I yanked off the headphones and backed away from the wall. My first thought was that somehow I was picking up radio transmissions or maybe audio from another floor. But I checked. The walls were concrete and steel, and I wasn't getting any interference on my equipment anywhere else in the building. I spent the rest of the day checking every inch of the 9th floor. The voices were everywhere, always the same pattern, an adult asking questions and a child answering. Sometimes I'd hear more than one child's voice. And always, underneath it all, that same humming melody. When I got back to the office, I did some research on the building. I found out that before it was an office building, the site had been home to Riverside Children's Home, an orphanage that operated from 1952 to 1987. The original building had been torn down in 1989 and the current office building was constructed in 1991. I also found some old newspaper articles about the orphanage. There had been allegations of abuse in the 1980s that led to its closure. Nothing was ever proven in court, but the stories I read were disturbing. Children reported being locked in small rooms, being forced to stay silent for hours at a time, and worse things that I won't repeat here. The next day, I went back to the building with a different approach. Instead of trying to find the source of the voices, I just listened. I sat in different offices with my equipment and recorded everything I heard. What I captured still gives me chills. The adult voice was always asking the same types of questions. Are you ready to be quiet now? Will you stay in your room like a good child? Do you promise not to tell anyone? The children's voices were harder to understand, but I could make out words like, please, and no, and it hurts. And that humming, I finally recognized the melody. It was, Hush Little Baby, the old lullaby. But it was being hummed in a way that sounded more threatening than comforting. I didn't know what to do with this information. I couldn't exactly tell my supervisor that I thought the building was haunted. But I also couldn't ignore what I was hearing. I decided to do some more research. I went to the city archives and found records from the children's home. Most of the files were sealed, but I found some public documents that listed the names of children who had died while in the home's care. There were more names than I expected, 12 children over the 35 years the orphanage operated. Most of the deaths were listed as accidents or illness, but a few were marked as unexplained or under investigation. And several of them happened in what the records called isolation rooms, small spaces where children were kept when they misbehaved. I started to wonder if those isolation rooms had been located where the 9th floor offices were now. The next week I got another work order. This time the complaint was different. The receptionist at Peterson and Associates said she'd been hearing children crying in the walls, and it was so loud and disturbing that they were considering breaking their lease. I went back to the building, but this time I wasn't alone. My supervisor, Dave, came with me because the property management company was getting pressure from multiple tenants on the 9th floor. We started in the law firm's conference room because that's where the receptionist said the crying was loudest. Dave was skeptical at first, but within 10 minutes of listening to the walls, his expression completely changed. The crying was unmistakable. Multiple children, sobbing quietly, like they were trying not to be heard. And underneath it, that adult voice again, but this time I could hear it clearly. Stop crying or I'll give you something to really cry about. You stay in there until you learn to behave. Dave pulled off his headphones and looked at me with wide eyes. What the hell is that? I told him everything I'd found out about the children's home. He listened quietly and then said something that surprised me. My grandmother worked at that place for a few years in the 1960s. She never talked about it much, but I remember her saying it wasn't a good place for children. She quit because she couldn't stand what was happening there. We spent the rest of the day documenting everything we heard. By the end, we had hours of recordings, children's voices, crying, that humming melody, and the adult voice giving commands and asking questions. Dave took the recordings to our company's owner, and within a week, the property management company had made a decision. They offered to relocate all the 9th floor tenants to other buildings at no cost, and they sealed off the 9th floor permanently. Officially, they said it was due to structural issues that made the floor unsafe for occupancy. But Dave told me the real reason was that none of the tenants were willing to stay after they heard the recordings. I still work for the same company, but I've never been back to that building. Dave told me they eventually sold it to a developer who planned to convert it to apartments, but the project fell through. As far as I know, it's still empty. Sometimes I wonder about those voices. Were they really the spirits of children who suffered in that orphanage, still trapped in their isolation rooms? Or was there some other explanation, maybe some kind of acoustic phenomenon that was picking up old sounds somehow? I don't know, and honestly, I don't want to know. But I'll never forget the sound of those children crying, or the cold, threatening tone of that adult voice telling them to be quiet. Some places hold on to their history in ways we don't understand. And sometimes the past refuses to stay buried. The thing beneath. I've been a locksmith for about 15 years now. It's a good job, helps people when they're locked out, install security systems, sometimes work with the police when they need to get into a building. You see a lot of different places and meet all kinds of people. Most of the time it's straightforward work. But every once in a while you get a call that stays with you. This happened in the summer of 2023. I got a call from a woman named Lisa who just bought an old house on the outskirts of town. She said the previous owner had left the house locked up tight when he moved out, and she needed me to help her get into the basement because the door was secured with several different locks and she didn't have the keys. The house was from the 1940s, a two-story colonial-style place that had been well maintained but was clearly decades old. Lisa met me at the front door and explained the situation. She'd bought the house from an elderly man who'd lived there for over 40 years. He'd moved to a nursing home and his family had handled the sale. Everything had gone smoothly except for one thing. The basement door was locked with what looked like 5 or 6 different deadbolts, and nobody could find the keys. The realtor said the previous owner was really paranoid about security, Lisa told me as she led me through the house to the basement door. He had extra locks on all the doors and windows, but the basement door is ridiculous. When I saw the door, I had to agree. I'd never seen anything like it. The door itself was solid steel, which was unusual for an interior basement door. And it wasn't just locked. It was secured with 6 different deadbolts, 2 slide bolts, and what looked like a heavy-duty security bar across the middle. But what really caught my attention were the signs. Handwritten notes taped all over the door. Do not open, keep sealed at all times, danger, structural damage below. If you hear sounds from basement, do not investigate. Lisa noticed me reading the signs. Weird, right? The realtor said the old man was kind of eccentric. We figured he was just paranoid about break-ins or something. I started working on the locks. They were all high-quality deadbolts, the kind you'd use on an exterior door. It took me almost 2 hours to get through all of them, and the whole time I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had really not wanted this door to be opened. When I finally got the last lock undone and removed the security bar, Lisa reached for the door handle. Wait, I said. Maybe we should talk about this first. What do you mean? I pointed to the signs. This doesn't look like someone who was just worried about burglars. This looks like someone who was trying to keep something in, not keep people out. Lisa laughed, but it sounded nervous. You don't really believe that, do you? It's probably just some old guy who watched too many horror movies. Maybe she was right, but I'd learned to trust my instincts over the years. How about this? Let me go down first just to make sure it's safe. Old basements can have structural problems, gas leaks, that kind of thing. She agreed, so I opened the door slowly. There was a wooden staircase leading down into darkness, and immediately I smelled something strange, not quite rotting but organic and unpleasant, like wet soil mixed with something else I couldn't identify. I turned on my flashlight and started down the stairs. They creaked under my weight, but they seemed solid enough. About halfway down, I noticed something odd about the walls. They weren't finished like most basements, no drywall or paneling. Instead, they were rough concrete, and the concrete had scratches in it. Deep gouges like something with claws had been scraping at the walls. At the bottom of the stairs, I found the light switch and flipped it on. A single bare bulb illuminated the basement, and what I saw made me stop breathing for a moment. The basement was completely empty except for 3 things. A pile of blankets in one corner, dozens of empty food containers scattered around the floor, and chains. Heavy metal chains attached to hooks in the concrete walls. But what really got my attention was the floor. Most of it was concrete, but in the center of the room there was a hole. Not a drain or a sump pump pit, an actual hole in the floor, maybe 4 feet across, with rough, jagged edges like something had broken through from underneath. I walked over to the hole and shined my light down into it. I couldn't see the bottom, it just disappeared into darkness. But I could hear something down there. A faint scratching sound like fingernails on concrete. How's it look down there? Lisa called from the top of the stairs. Don't come down yet, I called back. There's some structural damage I need to check out. I walked around the basement trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The chains were heavy, the kind you'd use to secure a large dog or restrain something that didn't want to be restrained. The blankets were old and dirty, arranged like someone had been sleeping on them. And the food containers were mostly empty cans, soup, vegetables, things that could be eaten cold. It looked like someone had been living down here. But who? And why the chains? I went back to the hole and listened again. The scratching sound was still there, but now I could hear something else, a low whimpering sound like an animal in pain. That's when I noticed the smell was stronger near the hole. That organic, rotting smell, but with something else mixed in. Something that smelled like fear. I backed away from the hole and headed for the stairs. I'd seen enough. "We need to call the police," I told Lisa when I got back upstairs. What? What's down there?" I didn't want to scare her, but I also couldn't ignore what I'd seen. It looks like someone might have been kept down there against their will. There are chains and evidence that someone was living in the basement. And there's a hole in the floor that I think we should have investigated by professionals. Lisa's face went white. "You mean like kidnapping? Someone was being held prisoner?" "I don't know, but that's what it looks like to me." The police arrived about 30 minutes later. 2 officers went down to the basement while Lisa and I waited in the kitchen. They were down there for a long time, and when they came back up, they both looked disturbed. "We're going to need to call this in to detectives," one of them said. "This is definitely a crime scene. Ma'am, you're going to need to find somewhere else to stay tonight while we process the house." Over the next few days, the story came out in pieces. The previous owner, Harold Voss, had been arrested at the nursing home and charged with kidnapping and false imprisonment. It turned out he'd been holding people in his basement for years, mostly homeless people who wouldn't be missed, people with mental illness, anyone he could lure into his house with promises of food or shelter. The hole in the floor was where he'd disposed of the bodies. The police found the remains of at least 6 people down there. But here's the part that still gives me nightmares. When the police searched the hole with professional equipment, they found something else. Recent scratches in the walls of the hole. Fresh scratches, made after Harold had been arrested and moved to the nursing home. And when they finally reached the bottom of the hole, they found someone alive down there. A woman named Sarah who'd been missing for 3 years. She was barely alive, malnourished and traumatized, but alive. She told the police that Harold had thrown her down there 6 months ago when she tried to escape. She'd been living on scraps of food that fell from above and rainwater that seeped through the ground. The scratching sounds I'd heard were her trying to claw her way out. If Lisa hadn't bought that house, if she hadn't needed me to unlock that door, Sarah would have died down there. But the story doesn't end there. Sarah told the police something else that I wish I didn't know. She said Harold used to come down to the basement late at night and tell the people he was keeping their stories about what he was going to do to them. And his favorite story was about how he was going to expand the hole, make it bigger so he could keep more people down there. She said he called it his collection. The police asked me to testify at Harold's trial about what I'd found in the basement. He was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Sarah survived, but she'll never be the same. Lisa never moved into that house. She sold it to a demolition company and they tore the whole thing down. But sometimes I drive by that empty lot and think about what was happening underneath that house for all those years, while neighbors walked by and had no idea that people were suffering just a few feet below ground. And sometimes, late at night when I'm lying in bed, I think about how many other houses there might be out there with locked basement doors and handwritten signs warning people to stay away. How many other Harold Vosses are there, keeping their own collections? I still work as a locksmith, but I pay more attention now to the jobs I take. And if I ever see another door with that many locks and warning signs, I think I'll find a reason to be busy that day. Some doors are locked for a reason and some secrets are better left buried. The lonely hallway. It was the middle of spring when my exams were quickly approaching. School had extended library hours to help us study, keeping it open until midnight for those of us who wanted to prepare longer. My house was only a 10-minute walk away from school, but I found it much easier to concentrate in the peaceful silence of the library, so that's where I'd been spending my evenings. That night I arrived around 6 o'clock. The library was bustling with other students working hard, but by the time the clock ticked closer to 10, I was one of the few still there. The place was usually filled with students who would gradually filter out as the hours went on, but tonight, it was dead silent. Everyone had either left or was already home, and I didn't notice how quickly the time had passed. It was around 10 when I realized I was alone. I had only about 15 minutes of studying left, so I decided to push through and finish my work. I was so focused that I didn't hear the strange noise at first. At first, it was just a faint tapping sound that I dismissed as nothing. But as I sat there in the quiet, it grew louder, like the sound of a heavy foot dragging across the floor. Suddenly, I heard a loud bang. A book fell off one of the shelves nearby and I froze in place. It sounded as though someone, or something, had just knocked it down. I wasn't sure what to make of it. Maybe it was just my tired mind playing tricks, but something told me it wasn't. I glanced around the library feeling uneasy. The room was still empty. No one was around. I packed my things quickly, my heart racing. I decided it was time to leave. As I walked out, I could feel the unease growing. The hallway outside the library was long and dimly lit. At the end of it was the school exit. Normally, this hallway was lively with students coming and going, but tonight, it was eerily still. I walked down the corridor, my footsteps echoing in the silence, when something caught my eye. At the far end of the hallway, I saw a woman standing completely still, her face hidden in the shadows. She was wearing a long, dark coat, and her posture was strange. Her legs looked twisted, almost like she was limping, struggling to walk. My pulse quickened and I instinctively called out, "Hello? Who's there?" The woman didn't respond. She just stood there, unmoving. I took a few more steps forward, but she didn't budge. My stomach churned and I felt an overwhelming urge to get out of there. I called out again, this time louder, "Who's there? Are you okay?" In the blink of an eye, the woman disappeared. It was as though she had vanished into thin air. I took a sharp breath, trying to calm myself, and continued walking toward the exit, still shaken by what I had just seen. When I stepped outside, the cool night air hit me. I tried to push the strange encounter from my mind and walked home. But something was wrong. The street, which was usually full of people, was completely empty. Not a single car drove by, and no pedestrians walked the sidewalks. It was like I had walked into a different world, one where time had stopped. I kept my head down, walking faster to avoid thinking about it. But something was still off. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw something strange, an unnatural shadow stretching across the ground. I looked up, and to my shock, I saw the same woman from the hallway walking slowly in front of me. She was stumbling along the sidewalk, her feet dragging with every step. She looked so odd, so out of place that I couldn't stop staring. Her clothes were torn and filthy, and her hair was wild, as if she hadn't combed it in days. Her movements were slow, almost painful to watch. She seemed like she was struggling to walk, yet there she was, limping ahead. I should have crossed the street, I should have turned around and gone back to school, but I couldn't. My feet were rooted to the ground, and I continued to walk behind her, my eyes fixed on the back of her. As I grew closer, I could see her hands twisted in strange angles, and I felt my stomach twist with dread. Suddenly she turned her head and our eyes met. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Her eyes were wide and hollow, as though she hadn't seen another person in years. I stood there, paralyzed, unable to answer her question. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. My entire body felt numb. She took a step closer and I could smell something foul in the air, like something rotting. "Where are you going?" she asked again, this time louder. I managed to find my voice, barely. I don't know." I pointed aimlessly down the street, hoping she would leave me alone. "I'm going that way." To my relief, she limped in the direction I pointed, moving far away until she was out of sight. I couldn't believe what had just happened. I was trembling with fear, but I knew I couldn't stay there any longer. I ran, my heart pounding, not daring to look behind me. I don't know how far I ran, but I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see her appear in front of me again. But nothing happened. I eventually made it to the corner of my street, my legs aching from running. But then I heard it. A faint scream echoed from a distance. The woman's voice, high-pitched and desperate, calling out, "She's here." I stopped dead in my tracks. The world around me seemed to fade as I tried to make sense of what was happening. I couldn't stay out there. I had to find someone, anyone, who could help me. I searched the streets for a sign of life, but everything was dead silent. Before I could do anything, my body went limp and I collapsed to the ground. The next thing I remember is waking up in my own bed. I was confused and disoriented. It was morning now, but I had no recollection of how I had gotten home. My neighbor had found me lying unconscious on the sidewalk and brought me back to my house. When I spoke to him about it, he told me an old story about a woman named Margaret who had lived in the area many years ago. Margaret had a daughter who died in a tragic accident, and after her death, Margaret was never seen again. People said her ghost wandered the streets, looking for her lost child. Her spirit had been trapped in the area, unable to move on, forever searching for the daughter she had lost. Margaret's story haunted me, but more than that, it stayed with me. The thought that her ghost might still be walking the streets, still searching, still lost. It made me wonder if I had somehow crossed paths with her. And I wasn't sure if I'd ever be able to forget the haunting figure of that woman, limping in the shadows, looking for someone to guide her back to the child she had lost. Candle midnight footsteps in the art room. Candle. It all started last winter, just after New Year's break. Our school had decided to hold a special week of extra classes to help students catch up before final term. I wasn't too happy about it. Who wants to go back to school early, right? But I didn't want to fall behind either, especially since I was struggling in a few subjects. The school wasn't open full-time, just from 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. That was already strange enough. Usually, schools are closed by evening, but they said this week would be different. Teachers were told to stay late, and the library, labs, and art rooms were open too, just in case any student needed extra help or a place to study. I'd always liked the art room. It was in the older wing of the school, a part of the building most people didn't go to anymore. It had creaky wooden floors, old dusty cabinets full of paints and brushes, and big windows that always looked gray no matter what time of day it was. Something about the quiet made it the perfect place to concentrate. Plus, almost no one else went there. On the second day of those special classes, I packed a thermos of coffee and decided I'd stay late in the art room to finish a project. I told my mom I'd be home by 10:30, and she didn't seem too worried since the school was just a 15-minute walk away. I reached the art room by 4 p.m. The halls were quiet, only a few students here and there. I greeted the janitor, Mr. Hughes, on my way in. He was a quiet man, usually minding his business but friendly enough to nod back. Inside the art room, everything was still. A faint smell of turpentine hung in the air. I set up my canvas, pulled out my supplies, and started working. Hours passed, and I was so focused on painting that I didn't notice how dark it had gotten outside. When I finally checked my phone, it was already 9:15 p.m. I should have left then, but I felt like I was on a roll. The painting was finally coming together. I thought I'd stay just another 30 minutes. That's when things started to feel different. The room suddenly felt colder, even though the radiator was still hissing gently in the corner. I put on my jacket and tried to ignore it. Maybe I was just getting tired. I kept working. Then I heard footsteps. Not right outside. No. They came from the storage closet inside the art room. At first, I thought it might have been something falling over. The closet was packed with canvases and tools. But then I heard it again. A soft, slow step. Then another. Like someone was inside. I froze. My heart was pounding. I whispered, "Hello?" No answer. I stood up slowly and walked to the closet. I put my hand on the door handle. "Mr. Hughes? Is someone in there?" No reply. I opened the door quickly. Nothing. Just the usual messy pile of frames, old sketch pads, paint cans. But something felt off. I turned around to go back to my seat, and that's when I saw it. A wet footprint on the wooden floor. It wasn't mine. I had worn dry sneakers all day. This print was bare, toes and all. And it was fresh. I could still see it glistening under the light. I looked around again. No one. No sound. That's when I decided to leave. I began packing my things quickly, not even bothering to clean my brushes. My hands were trembling. I threw everything into my bag, zipped it shut, and swung it onto my shoulder. As I reached for the door, it slammed shut. I stood there, stunned. I tried the knob. Locked. I started banging on the door. "Is someone out there? Hello?" No answer. The lights flickered once. Then again. And then they went out completely. I was standing in total darkness now. The only light came from the moon outside, through those tall, dusty windows. My phone was in my bag. I scrambled to get it out, turned on the flashlight, and scanned the room. Nothing. Then suddenly a noise. Scratching. From under one of the long tables. "Who's there?" I said, my voice shaking. I crouched slightly, shining the light beneath the table. Nothing. But the scratching continued. Then a whisper. "Paint with me." I dropped the phone in shock. It slid under the table. I didn't want to go after it. Every part of my body told me to run, to scream, to escape. But I needed that light. I got on my knees and slowly crawled under the table. Just as I reached the phone, something cold touched my shoulder. I jerked away and turned around. A figure crouched behind me. A girl. Pale, damp, eyes wide open like she hadn't blinked in years. Her clothes were soaked. Her fingers, long and stained with paint, reached out toward me. I screamed and scrambled back, hitting my head on the table as I came out. When I looked back, the figure was gone. The lights flickered back on. The door creaked open on its own. I didn't think. I just ran. Down the hallway. Past the library. Past the office. Down the stairs and straight out of the building. Outside, the air felt heavy. A low fog had rolled in. But at least I could breathe again. I reached the front gate and turned back for one last look. In the top window of the art room, a pale face watched me. I never went back to that wing of the school again. A few days later, I told my art teacher what happened. She looked uneasy, then quietly pulled me aside and told me something I'll never forget. 15 years ago, there was a student named Lily. She was shy, quiet, and always in the art room. She loved to paint. One winter evening, she stayed behind after hours, just like I had. No one knows exactly what happened, but she was found the next morning in the art room, drowned in a bucket of paint water. No one could explain it. There were no signs of foul play. The door had been locked from the inside. Some said it was an accident. Others whispered it was something darker. Since then, strange things had been happening in that room. Students reported cold spots, paintbrushes moving on their own, whispers when no one was around. But the school never officially acknowledged any of it. I was the first person to ever describe seeing her. My teacher told me, Lily never wanted to leave. The art room was her world. Maybe she just wanted company. I didn't say anything. All I knew was I was lucky to get out of there that night. I still paint sometimes, but never alone, and never in the dark. Because every now and then when it's really quiet, I still hear that voice in my head. Paint with me.